the Admiral of Hogwarts. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction, so please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story and all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter, and if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 301 New Enhancements. In a room in the basement of Hood Manor in London, Hugo was sitting cross-legged, diligently guiding the power converted from fate points to help the system spirit within his soul take shape. This task was actually a bit like sculpting clay figures, and with a template to follow. Even if Hugo's sculpting skills were poor, he could still complete the process. However, this kind of thing was a standard case of being easier said than done, so it wasn't until a full 24 hours later that Hugo opened his bloodshot eyes. "Admiral, are you alright?" Seeing Hugo supporting himself on the ground, trying to stand up, but his hand went weak and he sat back down, Victory, who was on duty in the room, immediately rushed over to support him. Then helped him to a seat. "I'm fine, it's just that I held one position for too long, and my legs went numb." Feeling the tingling sensation in his legs gradually receding, Hugo smiled and said to Victory beside him and Hood, who rushed in after hearing the commotion here. It must be said that the avid artifacts Hugo used to strengthen himself were indeed powerful. If it were a normal person, being in one position for 24 hours without moving would be enough to send them to the hospital, rather than being fine after moving around a bit like this. After the uncomfortable feeling in his legs passed, Hugo began to sense the system spirit that had already taken shape. Soon, a milky white light gate opened, and then a little girl hopped out. "Why is this Ayla a smaller version?" Looking at the blonde, blue-eyed little one in front of him, a puzzled expression appeared on Hugo's face compared to the Ayla in his memory. This Ayla was several sizes smaller from all angles. "Greetings, my Admiral." This Ayla ran up to Hugo, saluted, and said, "Please rest assured, I can complete all the tasks you assign. Welcome back to the team." Only after Ayla finished reporting in front of him did Hugo realize that the experience of ship girls and system spirits had nothing to do with their appearance, and this was also the most covert aspect of ship girls. At least for most people, it was hard to believe that a girl who looked only a dozen years old had experienced the most brutal battlefield. After a brief inquiry, Hugo discovered that Ayla was still significantly different from ordinary ship girls and system spirits. The biggest difference was that she still retained some memories from Ariana. Of course, most of the memory loss actually had little to do with Hugo. On the contrary, it was because of the modification that Ayla was able to recall certain memories in an orderly manner. After all, the long-term symbiosis with the Obscurus had seriously affected Ariana's memory and soul. Now, being able to recover so much was already an unexpected surprise. Unlike Victory, Ayla's power was more inclined towards production planning. When she was connected to the Admiral network, the efficiency of any production work done by the ship girls would be greatly improved. In addition, Ayla herself was also an expert in resource and labor management, capable of helping the ship girls develop reasonable action plans, and as summoning was also very important to Hugo. In addition to summoning a new system spirit, the most important thing was that his own level had been improved. The most obvious difference was that in the past, he could only acquire avatars worth 1 fate point, but now, multiple avatars worth 3 fate points were all open to him, unlike the previous low-level avatars that only allowed people to strengthen their strength, soul, and other aspects and gain some ordinary skills. These intermediate avatars not only had a greater degree of strengthening, but also came with a series of extraordinary powers. "Let me see the new avatars." Hugo excitedly opened the avatar list, only to find that there were now 3 optional avatars for him to choose from. Why aren't any of them human? The first thing Hugo did when he saw the avatars was to complain subconsciously, because among the avatars that appeared in front of him now were a salted fish, a polar bear, and a warship main gun. But no matter what, these avatars were obviously more powerful than the previous avatars. So, after taking a few deep breaths to calm his heart, Hugo spent 9 fate points to buy these avatars. Sure enough, although these avatars looked terrible in appearance, they were actually not bad. At least each avatar brought Hugo an unprecedented power. For example, the fish avatar allowed Hugo to transform into fish and survive underwater, allowing him to stay underwater for a long time like a ship girl without the aid of any external objects or magic. The polar bear enhancement also had the same transformation ability, and also came with greatly strengthening Hugo's original physical fitness, which was equivalent to the limit of human beings. To the level of a polar bear, this enhancement was not very meaningful to Hugo. Although the power of a polar bear was already very strong as a land animal, it was still far from being comparable to the steel bodies of the ship girls. So Hugo was still not as good as any ship girl. As for the third main gun avatar, it was the most useful of the three. In addition to strengthening his skin, muscles, and bones to a level similar to steel, it also allowed him to have the firepower projection ability of a German 127mm caliber gun. That is to say, my current combat power is equivalent to a metal polar bear with a destroyer gun. After reading the powers attached to these avatars, Hugo muttered softly. Although using such words to describe the current situation sounded a bit strange, it could perfectly describe his unique combat level after being strengthened. After completing his own strengthening, the next step was the summoning of ship girls. Considering the imminent outbreak of war, the list of ship girls this time was the result of everyone's discussion. All big ships, Hugo said after taking a look at the list. Fortunately, I made a big move before and obtained a series of fate points, otherwise I wouldn't be able to recruit these ship girls. This list was mainly composed of American ship girls. In addition to the Iowa-class 4 sisters, it also included several American ship girls that had been in service until the Cold War era. It had to be said that ship girls, combined with magic, were very powerful in covert operations. They could even take items from the 4 Iowa-class active warships that could be used as summoning coordinates. After all the items were in place, the summoning work began. As one bright light after another lit up, one ship girl after another was summoned. Soon, this not-so-large room was almost filled with ship girls because of the impending war. This time, in addition to the Iowa 4 sisters, there were all 5 Essex-class ship girls from the game who had been active until the Cold War era. In addition, Hugo also summoned Uberi and Hermione's sister ship Dido, Sirius and Argonaut, a total of 4 light cruiser ship girls and the destroyer ship girl Lightning among them. Uberi was to strengthen everyone's research capabilities, while the 3 Dido-class ship girls were to help their sister master the power of ship girls as soon as possible. As for Lightning, it was randomly drawn, mainly to consume the last bit of fate points. After all, in this time of preparation for war, increasing any amount of strength would increase the chances of winning. Chapter 302 Albania. Albania, near the capital Tirana, the bright sunshine illuminated every place, whether it was the houses, the ground, or the distant mountains, all shimmering golden in the sunlight. As a Mediterranean coastal country, Tirana in the summer has clear skies and not a single cloud in the sky. Because of this, at midday, everyone basically hides in their rooms or under trees, in shady places. But then again, because of the country's depressed economic situation, the streets here are very deserted regardless of the weather, and it doesn't look like a country's capital at all. Because of this, almost all the streets in Tirana and the houses on both sides of the streets look dilapidated, as if they haven't been maintained for a long time. On the side of a street named after Albania's national hero Skanderbeg, there is a coffee shop that is somewhat excessively dilapidated even by local standards. This coffee shop has a sign hanging from a cast iron pole, with the words Black Eagle Cafe written in gold lettering that has begun to peel off strangely. However, people who occasionally pass by this coffee shop only focus their attention on the restaurants and grocery stores in front of and behind the cafe, and don't even glance at the coffee shop. "We're here," said St. George, dressed in a black robe with a hood, in a low voice. This is the most well-informed place in the entire Albanian wizarding world. After speaking, led by St. George, Hugo and his group of 9 crossed the empty road and pushed open the slightly dilapidated door. After completing the comprehensive enhancement last time, Hugo only stayed at the Hood family home for 1 day, and then began to inspect the various key points that the ship girls had set up in Europe. However, unlike previous covert operations, Hermione is now a ship girl, so he doesn't need to avoid his sister this time. Soon, everyone filed in from the hot outdoors into the cool room, and as soon as he entered, Hugo smelled a strange mixture of tobacco and coffee in the room. Unlike Western Europe, people here rarely drink alcoholic beverages. Therefore, everyone is more accustomed to enjoying coffee, cocoa, or hookah together. Because of Hugo's group's attire and number, almost all the wizards looked at them when they entered. However, after seeing the anchor pattern embroidered on their robes and the golden masks covering half of their faces, everyone lowered their heads until they all went upstairs before daring to resume the previous conversations. Even so, the voices of these people's conversations were lowered a lot. Some even hurried to the front desks to pay their bills and ran out of the coffee shop. "Why do I feel like everyone here is afraid of us?" Hermione asked Hugo after arriving in the private room on the second floor and taking off her hood. This is because after Kirov took control of the 3 northern magic ministries and merged them into one, he immediately sent ship girls to the Albanian region to search for the whereabouts of certain people. Hugo replied to his sister, naturally, the ship girls' good looks, coupled with a mixed crowd in this place, naturally led to many conflicts, and even several bloody incidents, and in these conflicts, the ship girls not only won complete victories, but also captured or killed a large number of the wanted dark wizards who were active in this area. So from then on, if you wear this uniform and move around here, even those unruly guys will learn to avoid it, to avoid being involved in a huge trouble. Just as Hugo was explaining to his sister, the remaining ship girls also took off their hoods and began to chat, and the room became a lot livelier. In addition to the Granger siblings and St. George, the other 6 who came together were Hancock, Little Lexington, Dido, Indomitable, Odin, and Missouri. The reason why so many people were dispatched at once was because some of their previous informants had discovered Nagini's trail nearby. They came this time to contain that snake. The situation has been clarified, said St. George, entering with a tray carrying 9 cups of hot cocoa and some snacks. Someone has discovered some unusual traces in the mountainous area east of Tirana. We can go take a look later. Hugo nodded. By the way, have you heard any other new information besides this? A lot, and the main 2 that are related to us, St. George said while distributing the drinks. One is that our Skybroom 3 brooms are performing very well in the competition. Many people believe that the emergence of several Dark Horse Quidditch teams this year is closely related to the use of our brooms. The other news is that Peter just passed it to the Admiral Network. The news said that Peter escaped on the way from the Ministry of Magic to Azkaban prison, according to the internal news obtained by Javelin. Because Peter has always been in the form of a rat except during interrogation, the Ministry of Magic has been using a small cage during the detention process for convenience. As a result, it was only discovered after it was transported that there was a real rat in the cage, and Peter didn't know where he had run to. Is the Ministry of Magic a bunch of idiots? Hugo asked with disbelief after St. George finished the second piece of news. They clearly know that Peter is an unregistered animagus, so they should have made corresponding preparations. You're right, the Ministry of Magic does have a complete process, St. George shrugged. But the problem is that because of some internal problems in the Ministry of Magic, the process was not implemented. It turned out that according to common sense, all interrogation work related to Peter should have been the responsibility of Madame Bones, the director of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. However, Fudge intervened because the next Minister of Magic election was about to begin. This guy directly tried to transfer the auras directly under Bones and replaced them with his own hitmen, obviously hoping to get a piece of the pie in this incident. But now it seems that the business level of this group of hitmen controlled by Fudge is indeed somewhat problematic, so that Peter was able to escape in this almost certain situation. This matter can be said to be Fudge shooting himself in the foot, St. George finally concluded, although Javelin said that Fudge is trying to block the information as much as possible. This matter was widely publicized before, and it is estimated that everyone outside will soon know about it. Our Minister of Magic is really terrible. Hermione picked up the hot cocoa and took a sip, then shook her head. If I could be the Minister of Magic, this kind of problem would definitely not happen. That's a pretty difficult thing. Hugo put down his cup and said to his sister, you know that the pure blood wizards have a very high degree of control over the Ministry of Magic, and it would be good if our identities could become middle-level officials after entering the Ministry of Magic, unless you are willing to find a famous pure blood family to marry into, such as a member of the so-called 28 pure blood families. Otherwise, it is basically impossible for a Muggle-born wizard to reach that position. I won't marry into a family, Hermione said somewhat excitedly. I want to be the Minister of Magic to change this unreasonable situation. If I marry into a family, it means that I have not only failed to change the British wizarding world, but have been changed by the wizarding world instead. Chapter 303 Capture. After drinking some beverages and resting for a while, Hugo and his party walked into the vast mountains of the east. As a country dominated by mountains, most of the country's terrain is rugged, except for a few areas. Because St. George had been to that place before, she led everyone to the entrance of the mountain forest via apparition. However, contrary to what they had imagined, there were quite a few wizards at the entrance of the mountain, and even a small market of considerable size had formed inside the entrance. The Black Forest of Albania is a very famous area in the wizarding world, especially among dark wizards. This is because the Ministry of Magic lacks sufficient control And this mountain forest is rich in various magical raw materials, St. George introduced as she walked towards the entrance of the mountain. 2 members of the Albanian Ministry of Magic were charging each passerby at the entrance. But upon seeing Hugo and the others, they immediately opened the exit and respectfully sent them in, and when they passed through that small market, some wizards hurriedly lowered their heads and tried to stay away from them. But there were also other wizards who bowed to them with smiles. This is the effect after Kirov and the others took control of the Northern Ministry of Magic, St. George said via the Admiral network as she walked forward. They organized manpower, with the ship girls as the core, and thoroughly cleaned these places several times, and from then on, the order of this place was rebuilt. The wizards on their side obtained a crucial resource collection point, and the wizards operating legally here also obtained unprecedented security. The only ones who suffered were the Dark Wizards and Dark Wizard organizations who used to operate here, but among Dark Wizards, whoever has the bigger fist has the truth. And Kirov and her group's truth is the most powerful. So, after dozens of famous local Dark Wizards were either captured or killed, plus 2 vampire families who frequently attacked humans were uprooted, our authority has been implemented to the greatest extent here. So now, whether Voldemort is still hiding in the depths of the Black Forest as rumored has become a question mark. Because given the current situation, it is very likely that the other party will run away directly after hearing that something is wrong. As they chatted, the 9 people gradually went deeper into the forest. However, unlike the bustling scene at the entrance of the mountain, after walking for more than an hour, the surroundings began to become sparsely populated. In fact, for most wizards, resource gathering activities are kept as much as possible in the safer areas on the periphery. Because the dangers in the depths of the forest are fatal to most people, these dangers come partly from the magical creatures that grow in the depths of the forest, but also from the unique magical environment of the area, and this is why Hugo and the others took to walking into the mountains, because the magical interference in the depths of the forest will affect the accuracy of apparition, and flying makes it easy to be attacked by certain magical creatures. However, Hugo and the others did not encounter too many dangers along the way. This is mainly because, compared to humans, magical creatures obviously have a much stronger sense of danger. So they will actively avoid the path the ship girls are advancing on. Even so, advancing in this primitive jungle is not an easy task. After entering the jungle for more than 3 hours and starting to feel a little tired, Hugo finally arrived at the edge of a small pond. This is a pond formed by a natural spring, irregularly oval in shape, about 7 or 8 meters in diameter, and more than 1 meter deep. It is surrounded by moss and some weeds, and on the stone wall not far from the pond, a clear spring is gushing out from the cracks in the stone, and then flowing into the pool along a trace left on the soil with the help of the sunlight shining down from the branches and leaves of the surrounding trees. Everyone found that the periphery of the pool was full of traces of various animals passing by. Obviously, as the only water source in the area, many animals have used this as their drinking spot. In this way, naturally, many animals have also used this place as their hunting ground. Soon, everyone began to search around the pool, because according to previous intelligence, Nagini is now hiding here. Hermione and the Hugo siblings were assigned the task of the tree opposite the pool, and after careful inspection, they found traces of giant snakes wrapped around the tree, and a scale the size of a palm was also found in the cracks in the bark. It seems that the guy who sold the information didn't deceive us, St. George said with a satisfied nod after examining the scale in Hugo's hand with her wand. Moreover, this scale looks like it has just fallen off not long ago, which means that there is a high probability that the big snake should still be active in the surrounding area and has not left too far. It is not surprising that Nagini appeared in this place. After all, her soul has completely become the soul of a beast, so many behaviors are purely animalistic as a snake. The common hunting method mainly relies on attacks. After all, their body structure dictates that they cannot chase prey like cheetahs. Under such a premise, it is very reasonable for Nagini to hide near the pool and ambush the animals that come to drink, because this pool is an extremely perfect hunting spot for those cold-blooded animals. Realizing this, several aircraft carrier ship girls began to release carrier-based reconnaissance aircraft to scout the surrounding situation. Because for cold-blooded animals such as snakes and lizards, they need a lot of time to bask in the sun. Sure enough, 5 or 6 minutes after the reconnaissance aircraft were released, Little Lexington's reconnaissance aircraft discovered a scale flashing in a certain crevice, and then discovered a giant snake sleeping soundly in the crevice. It is temporarily impossible to determine the identity of this snake, but there is a high probability that the other party is Nagini. St. George privately chatted with Hugo through the Admiral network. After all, in theory, There should not be such a big snake in the wild in this area, although everyone does not know whether that snake is Nagini for the time being. The appearance of such a big snake in this kind of place is itself an abnormal thing. So everyone quickly decided to capture the snake. St. George volunteered to undertake this task. After all, she is better at dealing with these scaly things. Soon, St. George in full armor climbed up the cliff, and then fought with a giant python that was awakened. The giant python had actually discovered St. George when she was climbing on the cliff. But it obviously did not expect that a human could have such great strength in this way. Taking the initiative to attack turned into delivering a head to the door. The giant snake originally planned to take the opportunity of St. George's unsteady footing after climbing up to the cliff to suddenly attack and teach her a lesson with its fangs, but I didn't expect that the lightning-fast attack in its eyes was still too slow for the ship girl, so as soon as it showed its head, it was caught by St. George at the 7-inch mark, and then directly pulled out of the cave. Although the giant python that was thrown on the ground was not greatly injured, the heavy impact also obviously affected it. While it was still dizzy, St. George jumped down from the cliff, and then pressed the giant python's head firmly with her hand. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 304 Fight. The giant snake that had been dragged out was struggling fiercely on the ground, thrashing its body and the surrounding plants and trees into a mess. But even so, it still couldn't shake off St. George, who was pinning it down as the giant snake struggled in vain. A white light gradually emanated from St. George's hand, then enveloped the entire head of the giant snake in a ball of holy white light. This ball of white light looked like a dancing flame, and the moment the white light touched the giant snake's head, the giant snake began to struggle violently, as if someone was really burning its body with fire. I can confirm that the target is Nagini. St. George privately chatted with Hugo through the Admiral network while dealing with the giant snake. Because I can feel a powerful curse within its brain. In addition, the venom dripping from the giant snake's desperate struggles was also very telling, because even in the wizarding world, such a large snake with such strong toxicity was rare as the holy light in St. George's hands gradually scorched the giant snake. The giant snake also began to change. Whether it was tired or something else, its struggles became sluggish, and it no longer hissed incessantly like before. Now, the entire snake looked weak and lay on the ground. Only the tip of its tail. Occasionally. The ground, looking much gentler than before. The other party's previous violent behavior is likely related to the curse it received. Under the influence of a dark magic curse on its soul, this snake is naturally full of violent emotions. Not yielding explained. Watching the snake's movements lessen. The reason why the snake struggled so desperately at the beginning was because the conflicting power overflowed from the holy light and the curse, and it needed to use its entire soul to withstand it, so it would naturally struggle desperately because of the pain. However, as the power of the curse was gradually erased, and the holy light repaired its soul, this snake was able to slowly calm down. I see. Hermione nodded and said softly, but just as she was about to ask everyone how they planned to deal with the snake, Hancock, who was patrolling on the periphery, suddenly issued a warning. Who's there? Following Hancock's warning, a streak of blood. Red light shot out from her hand and flew into the bushes not far away. Then everyone present saw a wisp of black smoke flying away from the place that had just been hit. Hancock, Little Lexington, you two go after it first. The rest of you now form a defensive line with me and the Admiral as the core, ready to guard against possible attacks. Realizing that the situation was not right, St. George immediately issued an order through the Admiral network. After the order was issued, two shadows in black robes immediately rushed into the jungle, while the others quickly tightened their defensive line and vigilantly stared at the surrounding environment. What exactly was that just now? Hermione gripped her wand and vigilantly stared at the jungle, while whispering to Hugo, I feel like the shadow was carrying some faint aura of death. I'm not sure, but this is the Black Forest of Albania after all, Hugo said to his sister while maintaining secret contact with the other ship girls. This is one of the most dangerous magical areas in all of Europe, and many dangerous beings are constantly wandering in these mountains and forests. So, we can only wait and see how the reconnaissance situation is with Hancock and the others. It must be said that St. George is indeed worthy of the name of a saint. Even if the current situation has occurred, she is stable enough. So, even when everyone was on edge, St. George still completed the treatment work according to the original plan. Basically, It can be confirmed that this snake is Nagini, St. George reported to Hugo through a private chat on the Admiral network, because I found two completely different curses on the other party's soul. One of the curses is native, and it should be the blood magic curse that it was originally afflicted with, while the other is similar to some of the curses we found in the Chamber of Secrets to control snake creatures. That is to say, Voldemort has already been here, and what Hancock discovered just now was Voldemort. Hearing St. George say this, Hugo immediately became nervous. Don't worry. Voldemort in his current state, although difficult to eliminate, is definitely not our opponent. Hearing what our Admiral said, St. George immediately realized what Hugo was worried about, so she said, the power of Voldemort in this ghost-like state only lies in the erosion of the soul, but that is the most powerful area for us ship girls. So you don't need to worry about this at all. However, on the other hand, I don't think Hancock and the others will be able to catch Voldemort this time. Because in the absence of preparation, Voldemort in this state is too difficult to catch. Actually, it doesn't matter if we can't catch him. After all, time is on our side now. As long as our strength continues to be strengthened. Even if the other party can make a comeback, it won't cause us too much harm. Hugo comforted. It must be said that Voldemort is also a good man who can bend and stretch, knowing when to be. 10 minutes later, the two aircraft carrier ship girls each came back carrying a small bag. What's going on? Looking at the nearly 10 snakes and rats in their pockets, Hugo showed a puzzled expression. Because he could only see that these animals should have died at the hands of the ship girls, that guy's escape level was really too strong. Hancock threw the bag in her hand on the ground and said, the other party has mastered a bizarre means of possession, and has prepared a series of stepping stones in advance. Every time we kill an animal that it possesses, it will seamlessly transfer to another animal not far away, and the other party's magic resistance is ridiculously strong, little Lexington added at this time. I saw Hancock's blood butterfly flying knife hit the other party at least 5 or 6 times, but it couldn't even stop the other party for even a second. There's no way. My flying knife belongs to blood magic, so when attacking some dark magic creatures, especially those that are not flesh and blood, the lethality is always greatly reduced. Hancock shook her head, but Hugo knew that Hancock was just being modest here. As the assassin among the ship girls, Hancock's blood butterfly flying knife, in addition to targeting flesh and blood, also possesses extremely strong soul lethality. Although that level of soul lethality may not be able to completely eliminate Voldemort, multiple desperate transfers of the body plus the continuous attacks of multiple flying knives should be able to cause some degree of damage to Voldemort's soul. There are obvious traces of dark magic erosion on these things, which means that the other party should be a soul-like creature that can absorb life souls, not yielding, said after checking them. If we prepare a corresponding magic circle in advance, we still have a chance to leave this guy behind. But it is really impossible to do this in this kind of encounter battle. It's okay. After all, our goal is not to kill the dark magic ghost, Hugo said, looking at Nagini, who is now as docile as a water pipe lying on the ground. At least we have already achieved the predetermined goal, haven't we? Chapter 305 Confluence. By the way, is she healed? Hugo looked at the snake that had already fainted and asked St. George. I think her condition seems much more stable now. It's not that simple. St. George shook his head and said. It's easy to remove foreign dark magic, but her own blood curse can't be removed, at least in a short time. I'm just temporarily stabilizing the situation. Fortunately, the power mastered by Radiance is more inclined to healing, and should be able to remove this curse. However, because this is a symbiotic curse, removal needs to be done slowly, so it will take about 3 months to fully heal. But even so, some situations cannot be reversed even after the curse is lifted. That is to say, she will survive as a snake with human intelligence, but without any previous memories. It's better than enduring the curse like this all the time. Hugo looked at Nagini with pity and said, as for losing her memory, it may not be a bad thing for her, because as far as I know, everyone cursed by the blood curse has a painful past, so forgetting those memories shouldn't be a bad thing. And if she still retains human memories, discovering that she will be trapped in a snake's body forever in the future will definitely be a very, very painful thing. Rather than that, it's better to forget everything and start over, because Hugo didn't get to see the entire Fantastic Beasts series before coming to this world. He didn't know what Nagini's final outcome was, but judging from the first 2 films, the probability of a good ending wasn't very high. Next, St. George packed Nagini into a large bag, and then everyone returned to the edge of the jungle along the same path. What they didn't know was that not long after they left, a dark shadow returned to the pool. Damn it, a hissing sound like that of a snake came from the dark shadow, but if you listen carefully, you could hear the shadow speaking English. Such powerful dark wizards have entered this area to search. It seems I must leave. But before that, I must find a way to tell those followers. The reason why Voldemort mistakenly thought Hugo and the others were dark wizards at this time was very simple, because everyone was wearing robes and masks, and even wore hoods in the forest to avoid some trash falling on their heads. In addition, Hancock's blood butterfly flying knives, from a certain point of view, didn't look like magic that white wizards should master. The curse and murderous aura carried on them were enough for Voldemort to mistake them for a group of dark wizards. Hugo, of course, didn't know that Voldemort had returned to investigate after they left. So, after leaving the mountains and forests, they quickly traveled to Zagreb through the international flu network. In the wizarding world as the capital of the newly established country, Zagreb gives people a feeling of prosperity. Although some buildings still bear traces of war, most people's faces show a sense of vigor. It seems that Stalingrad and the others are doing a really good job, Hugo said to the ship girls behind him after walking a distance on the street after leaving the international flu network station. You can see hope in the eyes of the people, which shows that they recognize this land and this country, which is very rare for a place that has just ended a war. Considering the nature of the new country, the old Ministry of Magic locations were obviously no longer suitable for the situation. After all, it's best to erase some ancient traces in the new country. So, after a series of debates, the local wizards finally chose a manor located in the suburbs of Zagreb as the location of the new Ministry of Magic. This manor and the underground attached buildings used to be a secret command center prepared for the Cold War by the former Yugoslavia, and now it has been declassified and sold to the public. So, Kirov, who is now the Minister of Magic, naturally took this opportunity to use the identities of the local wizards in the Muggle world to buy this underground project, and then held this location as a private club for ordinary people. They only know that this manor, including the underground structure, was purchased by a consortium from the United States and transformed into a private entertainment venue for the manor owners. But in reality, as soon as the wizards got this underground fortress, they completely transformed the area and turned it into the new office location of the Ministry of Magic. And Hugo and the others are now going to this new Ministry of Magic, because for the next half month until his parents return to London, Hugo and his sister will be interning in this place. As for the ship girls who came with them this time, it is also for the same purpose. After all, there are countless things to do in a new country, and the ship girls, as the elite among the elite, can just handle some complex issues that have been accumulated before. The work we have to do now is to act as the temporary assistant to the Minister of Magic and help her deal with a series of chores. At the same time, we will understand the world of wizards from another perspective. On the way to the Ministry of Magic, Hugo introduced to his sister, since you plan to change the current situation of the wizarding world, then we must know the whole picture of the wizarding world. And the internship at the Ministry of Magic here can just allow us to observe this world from a perspective that we usually cannot access, of course, in order to avoid exposing our identities. So, in this process, we must change our appearance through a series of means and assume this position with another identity. Hugo and the others are certainly not formal employees of the Ministry of Magic, but rather the personal attendants of the Minister of Magic, Kirov. For the Ministries of Magic in various European countries, those senior officials have the right to hire their own staff. These personnel are not on the payroll, and the Ministry of Magic will not pay them any salary or benefits. They can be regarded as private staff who serve these senior officials of the Ministry of Magic completely under normal circumstances. Senior officials often let some young people they are optimistic about, such as the younger generation of the family or young people they are optimistic about, take on this position in order to train them to a certain extent. Therefore, after Granger and his sister were appointed by Kirov as his own personal attendants, few of the Ministry of Magic staff felt that something was wrong. Instead, they kindly arranged a small office next to the minister's office for them. I didn't know you could turn into this. After the others left the room, Hermione looked at Hugo, who had used the Avidar system to transform into a girl, and laughed out loud. But you look pretty good like this. You might attract a lot of male attention when you go out. After becoming a ship girl, Hermione was able to adjust her appearance through the power of the ship girl itself to become completely different from her original appearance. But she really didn't expect Hugo to be even more exaggerated in this regard. Sis, that's enough, Hugo said while dodging his sister's curious hands. You know, we must maintain the confidentiality of our identity now, and this method is the most effective one. Chapter 306 Wizarding Facts. Capturing Nagini earned Hugo 5 destiny points, and because of this, Hugo was somewhat curious about what Voldemort would use as the raw material for a Horcrux. If you were to make another one, however, Hugo quickly put these thoughts out of his mind, because he needed a lot of time to deal with various situations in the Ministry of Magic of the Western Balkans during this period. Yes, this emerging country was named after its geographical location. After the brutal war, everyone subconsciously avoided the inducements that caused the war. To prevent the war from making a comeback, of course, such a new Ministry of Magic naturally has countless tasks to busy itself with, and Hermione can just take this opportunity to gain an in-depth understanding of the operation of the entire wizarding world. I have to say that everyone has done a great job in this place, but it is difficult to replicate elsewhere. A week later, Hermione, who had collected a series of information, discussed it with Hugo. After all, the pure blood families in this place used to tend towards dark wizards, and most of the resources were concentrated in their hands. Therefore, after being defeated by the sisters in the war, we can naturally redistribute them, but the situation in Britain is completely different from here, and it is much more complicated. Therefore, it is basically impossible to copy it wholesale. You are right, but I think Britain is likely to break out into another war in the near future, Hugo said. Although he couldn't tell his sister the plot, many things could be easily calculated. You will find that the ending of the last Wizarding War was an ending that neither side of the war was satisfied with. Looking at his sister, Hugo analyzed seriously. For ordinary wizards, they paid huge sacrifices and costs in order to win the victory over the mysterious man and the Death Eaters. But what did they get? Pure bloods are still pure bloods, and they still occupy most of the resources from the Ministry of Magic to Diagon Alley. Even most of the Death Eaters, except for some with solid evidence, have escaped punishment under various pretexts. Although under pressure, the pure bloods have had to make slight concessions in certain areas, but compared with the price paid by those who bravely resisted, it is too small. And for the pure bloods, they cannot accept the fact that members of several so-called ancient families are imprisoned in Azkaban for life. They are even indignant about the little bit of profit that has been forced to be given up. You can see from the attitude of a series of new generation pure blood wizards led by Malfoy that the hatred of wizards from the pure blood family class towards other wizards is still passed down from generation to generation. This is like the period between World War I and World War II. After becoming a ship girl, Hermione made a special effort to carefully read a history of World War II, so she immediately felt that this era was very similar to the eve of the outbreak of war 60 years ago. You're right, this is the eve of war, Hugo nodded to his sister. And don't you think the Death Eaters are a bit like Germany before World War II? Because of the death of the mysterious man, they were defeated in an instant while preserving most of their strength. Under this circumstance, they will definitely not be willing to accept it, and they must be hoping to make a comeback at all times. Is this why the sisters have been setting up forces around the world from the beginning? Hermione asked. After connecting to the Admiral network, Hermione quickly learned about the ship girls' layout around the world. From this layout, she found that the ship girls had secretly established a network capable of mobilizing a large amount of manpower and material resources. Actually, everyone didn't think so much at the beginning. It's just because everyone's prototype is a warship, so they naturally have a military style, and they will subconsciously prepare for the next war, Hugo said to his sister. But as the understanding of the overall world situation becomes more and more in-depth, everyone has also felt some disturbing atmosphere in this regard, so naturally they will carry out more in-depth war preparations. I must say that everyone's preparations for war are still very valuable. A smile appeared on Hermione's face. At least if a war really breaks out one day, we will be able to gain enough advantage. In addition to understanding the wizards of the wizarding world, Hermione also learned about the living conditions of various non-human races, and expressed her approval of Kirov's order to grant citizenship to all non-human races willing to abide by the law. But then again, the reason why Kirov was able to issue such an order was because he had completely liquidated the local pure blood families who had stirred up trouble in the previous war. After all, if those families are allowed to use their advantageous position to seize resources, the remaining resources will naturally be very little to be distributed to other people. And the relationship between wizards and non-human creatures will not improve. But on the other hand, goblins still failed to obtain the right to hold ones that they had dreamed of. The main reason is that the ship girls demanded that the goblins hand over the local coinage rights, at least the coinage supervision rights, but the goblins refused. In this way, goblins naturally cannot obtain equal citizenship because they refuse to respect the law. And other creatures do not need wands, so naturally they will be involved in the decree on the use of wands. Actually, the most troublesome of these creatures are house elves. I really don't know how wizards completely turned such a race into a slave race. Soon, Hermione mentioned another focus of her observation. Unfortunately, Hermione has no good solution to the problem of this creature itself, and can only say to see if there is any good opportunity. As time passed day by day, Hugo and the others gained a deeper understanding of the wizarding world. And this knowledge will play an important role in the near future. During this time, they also received an invitation from the Weasley family, inviting them to watch the World Cup together. However, Hugo politely declined this invitation. In his reply, Hugo said that he and his sister had already accepted the invitation from Veneto and the others, and had agreed with the Weasley family and Harry to meet at the final site at that time soon. More than half a month passed. Hugo and Hermione rushed back to London on the day their parents returned, and then met with Hood after only spending 2 days with their family and prepared to go to watch the Quidditch World Cup final. The final venue is built on a vast uninhabited swamp, because Hugo and the others' tickets were tickets for the broom sponsor Salem and the others. So they were allowed to arrive through the portkey on the last day. Admiral, are you feeling better? On the edge of an open space, a group of people who had passed the inspection of 2 Ministry of Magic staff members came out, and Renown was supporting Hugo, who looked a little ugly. In the middle, much better, I can walk on my own, Hugo said to Renown. I really didn't expect this long-distance portkey to be so dizzying. If I had known this, I should have used apparition. To be honest, apparition is also more uncomfortable, but compared with the dizziness caused by this long-distance portkey, it is as enjoyable as a breeze. Miss Missouri brought people over yesterday. We can go over and meet them now, the head maid said to Hugo, and soon they followed a path through the camp and arrived at the designated station. Chapter 307 Go to the World Cup. Unlike the tents set up by most wizards, the shipgirls' tents looked more like ordinary people's camping tents. However, this wasn't just one tent, but a small camp area composed of 7 or 8 tents. From the layout of the camp, it was clear that the shipgirls placed Hugo's personal safety as their top priority, so his tent was placed in the very center, surrounded by the other shipgirls. After putting his luggage into the central tent, Hugo and Hermione planned to visit some designated shops to see if there were any interesting souvenirs to buy. Various dried fruits, snacks, 20% off when packaged, telescopes, panoramic telescopes, 10 galleons each. At first, Hermione considered buying a telescope, but later realized that her eyesight as a shipgirl wasn't much worse than a normal person's when using a telescope. Moreover, by communicating through the Admiral network and the shipgirls distributed throughout the stadium, she could even achieve a 360-degree, no blind spot observation of the entire stadium at any time. By the way, which team are we supporting this time? Looking at a shop not far away that was selling various merchandise of the 2 teams entering the finals, Hermione seemed a little hesitant. After all, they weren't ardent Quidditch enthusiasts, they were just here to watch the game, so they naturally didn't have a strong preference for supporting any particular team. Of course, it's Ireland. Hugo picked up a shamrock brooch from the counter and said, "Don't forget, we're considered sponsors of the Irish team this time." Of course, out of habit from his previous life, he only accepted the shamrock brooch and a cloak with the Irish team's crest, while firmly rejecting the Irish team's cheering hat. Perhaps because this was a rare opportunity for wizards from all over the world to gather together, the small merchants in the market also came from all over the world. In addition to the legal goods, if you were willing to chat with these small vendors, you could also see things like flying carpets or dragon eggs, which weren't exactly legal. Finally found you guys. Just as Hugo and Hermione were preparing to purchase some rare South African herbs, a voice came from behind them. Fred, George, it's good to see you. Seeing the red-haired twins, Hugo greeted them directly and then asked, "Didn't you say you were going to make a big splash with this opportunity? Why don't I see you carrying your goods? I remember you should have a lot of things to sell." "Don't mention it. Mother discovered something was wrong before we came." Fred sighed deeply. "I have to say, Mom's summoning charm is really powerful." George shrugged. "That 5-foot-long order was completely burned, and all the goods we prepared were confiscated." "Well, your luck is indeed a bit bad." Hugo could only shake his head helplessly. It had to be said that Mrs. Weasley was indeed a skilled spellcaster. It was difficult for ordinary people to use a summoning charm to find all kinds of hidden items with a simple summoning charm, which further illustrated the advantages of pure-blood families in spellcasting. At the invitation of the Weasley twins, Hugo and Hermione went directly to where the Weasley family was. As a result, from a distance, they saw a somewhat chubby middle-aged man talking to Mr. Weasley about something. Ludo Bagman, a middle-aged man that a normal person would remember firmly after just one glance. Even surpassing a certain idiot in a diving suit who complained about the weight of his clothes. He was currently wearing a long Quidditch robe, with wide yellow and black horizontal stripes, and a huge hornet splashed across his chest like ink. Judging from his build, he used to be physically strong, but now he was starting to decline. The robe was stretched tightly over his big belly, but the fat under his skin also kept his face free of wrinkles, making him look younger. As a former member of the English Quidditch team, his reason for choosing to wear the Hornet team's uniform at the World Cup was very simple. The English Quidditch team's performance this year was simply too terrible. Even in the Balkans, Hugo had heard from the news that the English Quidditch national team had lost to the Transylvania team by an absolute large margin in this year's qualifiers, considering that the Quidditch hooligans in the British wizarding world were even more notorious than the football hooligans in the ordinary world. Bagman's decision not to wear the national team uniform was a very correct choice for personal safety. According to Mr. Weasley, this former player was now the newly appointed director of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, theoretically one of the busiest people, but he seemed to be openly slacking off soon. Ludo Bagman began inviting everyone to bet on the game. Mr. Weasley spent a galleon betting that the Irish team would win. The Weasley twins were stopped by Hugo before they could place their bets. "Why didn't you let us place a bet?" After Ludo Bagman realized that no one wanted to continue betting and left, Fred asked Hugo curiously. "The reason is very simple, because someone saw Bagman borrowing money from Gringotts to prepare to open a betting pool in the game. And the Bagman family doesn't have any prophetic bloodline, so once they gamble, they're likely to lose 9 out of 10 times. Venus stepped forward to explain at this time, that's why he's not caring about his job at all now, and instead is desperately trying to get people to gamble here. Because if his profit margin is below 30% this time, he can directly declare bankruptcy. If that's the case, then not asking him to take our bets just now was the right thing to do." The twins patted their chests with lingering fear. At the same time, they had just learned from their father that Venus was a staff member of the International Magical Trading Standards Association and wasn't the gossipy type, so what she said must have a basis, and if what Venus said was true, then participating in gambling at this time would become a very foolish thing. Not to mention what would happen if they lost the bet. Even if they won, they might not be able to get the money. The Quidditch World Cup could be seen as a good opportunity for wizards all over the world to gather, so it was a good opportunity to make friends for wizards who were usually more reclusive. For Hugo, this was also a good opportunity to get to know the ship girls openly, in order to facilitate future actions. However, the impression wasn't so good for those around who saw this scene, especially the men. Because what they saw was a male who didn't seem to be of age chatting and laughing with a group of beautiful girls. The rest of the day was spent eating barbecue, drinking beer, and chatting. Accompanied by the ship girls, Hugo felt that this wonderful time passed quickly as time went on. Hugo could smell an emotion called excitement gradually permeating the air. He could even feel the excitement in the air, almost solidified. Even with his eyes closed, the surrounding conversations in the camp area also became smaller, as if people were suppressing the excitement in their hearts, and even the summer air seemed to be trembling with anticipation. Chapter 308 Accident and Beginning. As the afternoon wore on, a feeling of excitement, like a palpable cloud, spread over the campsite. By dusk, even the still summer air seemed to tremble with anticipation as night fell like a curtain over hundreds upon hundreds of eagerly waiting wizards. The last vestiges of pretense vanished. The Ministry of Magic seemed to succumb to the inevitable, no longer opposing the people, and allowing obvious signs of magic to emerge everywhere. The vendors who had previously been concentrated in designated tents paraded in, carrying trays and pushing carts filled with various match-related merchandise. "Everyone ready, girls?" Hugo asked, standing in the center of the camp after loading a charmed PPK pistol with unfailing manufactured magic bullets, cocking it, turning off the safety, and placing it in a concealed underarm holster. "We can get dressed faster than you think. After all, we can change clothes with one click." St. George was the first to come out, wearing a white robe embroidered with the gold trim behind her. The others, all dressed in finery, filed out of the tent. Then they gathered in a group in the open space of the camp and chatted. "Then let's go," Hugo said to the girls, and then walked out of the camp with everyone. "Haven't you found the whereabouts of that drat and the mysterious person yet?" Watching everyone gather around, curiously looking around, Hugo privately chatted with Renown, who was responsible for the specific actions in this regard, through the Admiral Network. "Indeed, we haven't found them. Our people were ambushed in advance near the Riddle family mansion, but they didn't find any traces of those people. In addition, we are also maintaining surveillance near Barty Crouch's house. But strangely, without finding anyone visiting, Barty Crouch Sr. was controlled by the Imperious Curse. Unlike the surveillance of the Riddle Mansion, there was a fatal loophole in the surveillance of Barty, but that was also the best choice under the existing constraints. After all, Barty was a senior official in the Ministry of Magic, and his residence had ample security. Therefore, even if the current ship girls possessed the firepower to destroy the room, including the people in it, in a matter of seconds, they could not monitor the other party for a long time in secret. But what we can now confirm is that the wizard who cast the Imperious Curse should be very familiar with Barty Crouch. Only in this way can he enter this building through the Flu network with the other party's permission. Now the question is, who is that person? Hugo Citan said, we conducted an investigation at the Flu network administration's baffle, but because there is no surveillance of the residences of senior Ministry of Magic officials, we can only know that the other party came from mainland Britain. St. George shook her head. We have changed too many things before, so now everything has entered chaos, Hugo Citan said, but you just need to be prepared for this kind of thing. Actually, we were planning to take advantage of this Quidditch World Cup to prepare for a small-scale exercise, St. George said somewhat embarrassedly at this time. Exercise? That's a good thing, Hugo nodded, and then connected to the Admiral network to check the content of this ship girl training, but soon his eyes widened. Isn't this exercise a bit too exaggerated? After reading the report for the first time, Hugo immediately contacted St. George privately through the Admiral network because Hugo was surprised to find that all the newly summoned shipgirls had joined this exercise, and the weapons used in the exercise even included the W squadron of those Cold War aircraft carriers and the BGM-109A of the Iowa Four Sisters. The reason why Hugo was nervous was because the W squadron was the nuclear strike squadron of American aircraft carriers during the Cold War, and could launch 36 300,000-ton level bombs in one strike, while the BGM-109A was a Tomahawk missile equipped with a 200,000-ton nuclear warhead. Don't worry, all attacks are simulated attacks. And we will definitely not have accidental attack incidents like human users, St. George comforted Hugo. This is just to prepare for the worst-case scenario. Although Hugo had enough trust in the shipgirls, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous when he thought that hundreds of nuclear warheads were ready to go nearby. Fortunately, out of trust in everyone, Hugo quickly adjusted his mentality, and then focused his attention on the people around him. Obviously, the Quidditch World Cup was a grand event in the wizarding world, so Hugo also saw a lot of his acquaintances along the way. For example, he found Professor McGonagall gesticulating and talking to several professors around her. In addition, they also saw many classmates passing by, but everyone just nodded to each other in a hurry and continued to shop or chat. Clang. At this time, a deep and sonorous gong sounded from somewhere in the distance of the forest. Immediately, thousands of red and green lanterns bloomed with light on the trees, illuminating the road to the stadium. It's time. Mr. Weasley, who was chatting with and failing, suddenly became excited, looking as excited as everyone else. Hurry up, let's go. Mr. Weasley led the way, and everyone, clutching the things they had bought, strode into the forest along the lantern-lit path. They could hear hundreds and thousands of people walking around in the direction of the stadium, hear shouts, laughter, and snatches of song. This frenzied excitement was very contagious. Even though Hugo had been a little worried about what might happen after the plot changed, he was also caught up in the joy at this time. Everyone walked together in the forest for 20 minutes, chatting and joking loudly, and finally came out of the other side of the forest. At this time, they found themselves in the shadow of a huge stadium. Hugo could only see a part of the magnificent gold walls around the stadium, but he could tell that it could easily hold 10 cathedrals. Also a stadium that can hold 100,000 people. The Wizard Stadium is obviously much larger than the average person's. After all, Quidditch matches require more space. It can hold 100,000 spectators, Mr. Weasley said with a proud look on his face when he saw the surprised expressions on the children's faces. 500 Ministry of Magic staff have been working on this for a whole year. In addition to the infrastructure, every inch of this place has been cast with muggle-repelling charms. It's really amazing, Hugo murmured, looking at this kind of ability. He felt that wizards were actually the most suitable as the vanguard of mankind to explore outer space. Actually, we can take the harmony between ordinary people and wizards as the goal of our future struggle, Hood said seriously after realizing what Hugo was thinking. Anyway, We have great power and a long time, so we can completely formulate a plan that may take normal people several lifetimes to complete as our goal. You're right. When immortality is very close to us, we do need to formulate some long-term projects that focus on the future. After listening to Hood's words, Hugo nodded in agreement. Chapter 309. The game begins. First class ticket. The witch at the entrance of the Ministry of Magic looked at their tickets and said, "Top box. Keep going upstairs, Miss Massachusetts." All the way to the top, the stairs leading to the stadium were covered with crimson carpets. They went up the stairs with a crowd, and slowly the crowds dispersed into the stands on the left and right. Hugo and the others continued upwards until they stopped at the top of the stairs. Next, the Weasley family, Sirius, and Harry walked directly to the central box, while Hugo and the others turned a corner and followed the carpet to the box next door. This box was actually the same as the main box, with 20 gilded chairs inside. However, the location was obviously not as good as the box where the Weasley family was. Just as Hugo and the others were seated, Kirov walked in with several shipgirls who were currently working in the West Balkan Ministry of Magic, senior officials from the Ministry of Magic of a small country, alchemy masters from mainland Britain, and tycoons from the United States. It's all thanks to the British Ministry of Magic for making such arrangements, Hugo muttered softly. Their seats were arranged together with Venus's help to ensure that everyone in the room except Hugo was a shipgirl. Interestingly, they could see the Weasley family and Harry, so they all grabbed the railing of the stands and waved to each other looking down at the railing. Hugo saw the wizards gradually taking their seats. The seats of the stadium surrounded the oval stadium, arranged in tiers upwards. Everything here was shrouded in a mysterious golden light, as if the light came from the stadium itself. From their high vantage point, the arena looked as smooth as velvet. 3 quaffle hoops stood at each end of the field, 50 feet high. To their right, almost parallel to the top box, was a huge blackboard, on which golden letters constantly flashed, as if an invisible giant hand was writing and erasing on the blackboard. "Are you doing advertising here?" Looking at the dazzling Nimbus 3 broom on the blackboard, Hugo subconsciously turned to Massachusetts and asked, "I feel like the advertising fee here shouldn't be cheap. This advertising is free because we sponsor the Irish team in the finals." Massachusetts glanced at the advertising and said, "We originally wanted to shoot an advertising short film, but there is only an old blackboard here. The main reason is that the British Ministry of Magic is too conservative." Indomitable suddenly popped out from the site and said, "I even specially promoted an alchemical curtain to them before, which can play animations like a big screen, but the Ministry of Magic rejected it because they believed it was a completely new item that had not been tested by enough time and was not suitable to appear in this place." On the other hand, the Chinese Ministry of Magic specifically bought 15 screens of various sizes from me this time, and is also talking to me about technology transfer in this area. Amidst Indomitable's complaints, the Nimbus 3 advertising on the blackboard disappeared, and the Firebolt advertising appeared immediately. No matter how you look at it, this arrangement has a strong sense of competition. There will be a team mascot performance before the game starts. Hermione flipped through the tassel-covered program on the box's coffee table. Each country will bring some mascots at this time. For example, the Russians brought ice bears last time. Savitsky Soyuz, sitting in the back, said, "Seriously, that thing was awesome, but the things the two teams brought this time are not that interesting. Whether it's the leprechauns from Ireland or the Vila from Bulgaria, they both feel a bit lacking." Well, aesthetics are something that can't be unified. Hugo rubbed his forehead helplessly. Obviously, Savitsky Soyuz's aesthetics were not the same as most people's, and she might have more in common with Hagrid in this regard. "I think we should visit the Minister of Magic now." After sitting in the box for a while, Kirov, as the Minister of Magic of the West Balkans, stood up and said, because she saw Fudge walking into the central box. Hugo hung a first-class Order of Merlin medal on his chest and pretended to be Kirov's translator to visit the British Minister of Magic. "Mr. Fudge, welcome, Minister Kirov." Seeing Kirov enter the box, Fudge immediately stood up, shook her hand, and offered a welcome speech. Hugo then translated the sentence into Serbian-Croatian while being fully connected to the Admiral network. "I am very happy to participate in the Quidditch World Cup held in the UK this time. This is a very excellent international event." Kirov nodded and said a series of official platitudes. Hugo then translated these things into English. After these formalities were completed, everyone began to chat, and many of them were related to trade and other matters. After all, as an emerging force, the West Balkans now needs to develop various trades because it was a diplomatic etiquette before. Kirov naturally needed a translator. In the following negotiations, Kirov could negotiate in English, and Hugo just happened to have free time to chat with the Weasley family. Taking the opportunity to chat, Hugo also scanned the box, and found that Barty Crouch was in the box at this time, and there was no situation where the house elf was occupying the seat as in the original text. However, according to Kirov's observation, old Barty was still under the control of the Imperious Curse, but the caster's level was very high, and the casting method was very clever, so no one else noticed this. In the next scene, Hugo saw Mr. Weasley and Lucius staring at each other face to face, while simultaneously taunting each other. Fortunately, not only the Minister of Magic was staring at them at this time, but there were also a bunch of people with status in the room. Therefore, they could only provoke each other slightly with words, and then glare at each other. Fortunately, a round guy rushed over to break the deadlock. It turned out that Ludo Bagman broke into the box at this time. Judging from his panting appearance, he should have just finished registering his bets and arrived just in time. "Is everyone ready?" He looked at Fudge and said, his round face shining like a huge ball of cheese. "Minister, can we start?" "Start whenever you're ready, Ludo," Fudge said affably. Although the minister was a little upset that his subordinate almost dropped the ball at this time, it was not appropriate to say anything under the gaze of a group of big shots. Ludo drew his wand, pointed it at his throat, and said, "Sonorous." Then what he said sounded like thunder, resounding throughout the packed stadium. His voice echoed above their heads, loudly reaching every corner of the stands. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the 422nd Quidditch World Cup Final. Chapter 310 Fierce Battle." After Ludo Bagman announced the start of the match, the audience erupted in cheers and applause. Thousands of flags waved simultaneously, accompanied by a cacophony of national anthems, creating a truly lively scene on the scoreboard opposite them. The last line, "Bertie Bott's every flavor beans, a risk with every mouthful," was wiped away, now displaying, Bulgaria 0, Ireland 0. "That noseless guy either didn't come or he's in disguise," Indomitable said to Hugo through the Admiral network as he returned to the box. Dozens of ship girls distributed around the stadium were now fully searching the stands, but found nothing. "If he's coming, he should be hiding in the campgrounds. After all, there are too many people in this kind of stadium, and it would be easy to get trapped if something happened," Hugo said, looking at the cheering crowd below. "If that noseless guy was in his prime, he might dare to do something like this, but even in the best-case scenario, he's only half alive now. He shouldn't be so reckless." Just as the two of them finished talking, a loud cheer erupted from a neat, bright red formation on the right side of the stands. It turned out that the Bulgarian team's mascots had entered the arena. 100 Vila glided onto the field, their skin gleaming with a soft, moon-like radiance, their hair billowing behind them even without wind. After the music started, the Vila began to dance in rhythm. It has to be said that compared to them, the various cheerleading squads in the ordinary human world were clearly inferior. However, to Hugo, these Vila's appearances could only be described as relatively pretty, but not particularly attractive. After all, if the ship girls were to remove the disguises they usually wore, any one of them would be more beautiful than these Vila. But the Vila had a different effect on others. For example, Hugo could see that the adults in the minister's box seemed very calm, but the minors were clearly affected. The Weasley twins had struggling expressions on their faces, their hands clenched into fists as if resisting something. Harry and Ron, on the other hand, each had one leg over the railing, and the other began tearing at the shamrock on his hat. Malfoy looked very calm, but under Indomitable's guidance, Hugo noticed that the defensive magic on the brooch on Malfoy's chest had been activated, even emitting a faint white light. In fact, many wealthy people in the magical world prepare some magical defensive items for themselves, among which magical items that prevent mental interference are the most popular, and the one on Malfoy's chest should obviously be an heirloom from his family. As the Vila danced, a faint, alluring magic permeated the entire arena. However, to Hugo, these mental powers were too insignificant compared to the Admiral network to have any effect. Obviously, the Bulgarian side also knew about this characteristic of the Vila. So, they stopped while they were ahead, stopping the Vila from dancing and leaving the field before the other wizards became too agitated. However, at this time, as the awakened wizards roared, most of the wizards in the arena who supported the Irish team suddenly turned to the Bulgarian team, and some impatient ones even began to tear off the Irish team's shamrock logo on their bodies. "Now," Ludo Bagman's voice boomed, "please raise your wands into the air, and welcome the Irish national team's mascots." Immediately afterward, with a whoosh, a huge green and gold object flew into the stadium, like a large comet. It flew around the stadium once, then split into two smaller comets, each heading towards a set of goalposts. Suddenly, an arched rainbow appeared across the stadium, connecting the two shining balls. The crowd erupted in gasps of "ooh" and "ah," as if watching a fireworks display. Soon, the rainbow faded, and the shining balls connected and merged, forming a giant, dazzling shamrock. The shamrock flew high and began to circle overhead, scattering thousands of golden lights from the shamrock onto the stands, like golden raindrops. Through his enhanced vision, Hugo discovered that it was actually composed of countless little people wearing red vests and sporting mustaches, each carrying a small golden or green lantern. Everyone in the arena suddenly became excited. People cheered and scrambled chaotically, or crawled under their seats to pick up gold coins. For example, Ron and Harry in the next box were picking up gold coins. However, almost no one in Hugo's box bent down to pick them up. Only Indomitable picked up a few out of curiosity, intending to study the innate magic of the Irish leprechauns through this object. Just as Indomitable began to carefully analyze the magic contained in the leprechaun gold coins, Hermione stood at the edge of the stands, observing the entire field. Suddenly, she muttered to herself, "How did those two learn care of magical creatures? It's simply embarrassing." After hearing this, Hugo raised his head and twisted his neck to look in the direction Hermione was looking. As a result, he saw Harry and Ron in the top box, each holding a handful of leprechaun gold coins and grinning foolishly. Seriously, doing this in front of a bunch of big shots from the magical world is really embarrassing. It's understandable if many people below haven't studied care of magical creatures and are fooled, but it's really inexcusable for you guys. Of course, if Ron and Harry heard what Hugo was thinking now, they would definitely say, "Who's as perverted as you guys, memorizing the entire book after getting the textbook?" At this time, Ludo's voice rang out again, "And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Bulgarian national Quidditch team. Let me introduce Dimitrov." In his introduction, the players came out one after another. It must be said that although Ludo is a gambling addict, he really does a good job in his professional work. At least now the atmosphere of the game has completely heated up. Every time Ludo called out a name, the audience below echoed loudly. Especially when the Irish team was mentioned, the home field advantage allowed the cheers of the audience to resound throughout the stadium, and our referee today, traveling from afar from Egypt, the deeply supported president of the International Quidditch Association, Hassan Mostafa. In the final introduction, the referee, who had come all the way from Egypt, strode into the arena wearing a golden robe that immediately evoked images of the vast desert. Then, he kicked open the box. All kinds of balls shot straight into the air, and the smallest golden snitch directly disappeared without a trace. As he blew the delicate silver whistle in his mouth, the game began. Hugo, as someone who wasn't very interested in Quidditch, could also see that the game here was indeed top-notch, because all the athletes were flying much faster than those players at school, even forming streaks of red and green shadows in the air. At this time, Ludo's commentary speed soared, because many times he had just said the name and the quaffle had already appeared in someone else's hands. Many Quidditch tactics that Hugo had only seen in books were used smoothly, and even Ludo didn't have time to announce the names of these tactics. Comparing it this way, it must be said that Quidditch at school is actually just a game for students to relax in their spare time. Of course, for Hugo and the others in the arena, tracking these players was very simple. After all, these players didn't fly as fast as airplanes and were easily locked onto by everyone. "Well done," Hermione cheered, raising her hands. Because the Irish team scored the first goal of the game in less than a minute after the start. Seeing those leprechauns watching the game on the sidelines rise into the air again, once again forming that huge, sparkling shamrock. The villa on the opposite side of the field stared at them with gloomy faces. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 311 End of the Game. After carefully observing the players flying around the field like meteors, Hugo felt that the Irish team's players were clearly better coordinated. If the Bulgarian team didn't have Crumb, they would definitely lose badly. Sure enough, only 10 minutes into the game, the Irish team scored 3 goals, changing the score to 30-0, causing a huge cheer from the green-clad supporters. Soon after, the Bulgarian team launched an attack and scored a goal, after which the Velas came out and began their mental interference. During this time, the two seekers, Crumb and Lynch, fell rapidly through the other players. "Man, this is almost like a leap of faith," Ryan said in surprise, watching the people falling faster than free fall. There's no haystack down there, they're true warriors. As it turned out, it was just a feint by Crumb. Lynch was tricked and fell directly to the ground. Fortunately, after examination, he was still able to play. However, this also shows that Crumb is indeed very famous. After all, Lynch is also a professional player on the national team, and he shouldn't be unable to distinguish the ground from the sky. The only reasonable explanation for why he dived like that just now is that they had already planned before the game to have Lynch try his best to interfere with Crumb's actions, so he took the great risk of doing such a steep dive. The next 25 minutes were the most intense game Ryan had ever seen. The score quickly widened, which also led the Bulgarian players to resort to unscrupulous means and start directly attacking players. They elbowed the Irish team's goalkeeper and then directly charged into the Irish team's chaser, who was carrying the ball. Naturally, this resulted in the Bulgarian team being penalized 2 goals, further widening the score. The Bulgarian team's mascots, the Velas, started fighting with the taunting leprechauns. They transformed into bird-headed, human-bodied figures with wings on their backs, and then threw flame-like objects towards the leprechauns. Members of the Ministry of Magic rushed onto the field to try to separate them, but it seemed to have little effect. Fortunately, these mascots were obviously trained, so as flying creatures, they were off fighting on the ground, without affecting the game in the air. This fight is really intense. Hugo felt that the battle on the ground was as intense as the game in the sky. It must be said that magical creatures have their unique side in many places. At least Hugo felt that Velas, creatures with human intelligence and innate magic, although their magic was a bit monotonous, their combat power could basically be regarded as similar to that of a simply trained wizard. If there were no targeted preparations, of course, this judgment may not be accurate, because the specific combat effectiveness of the British Ministry of Magic staff has always been a mystery. Those few staff members who were being chased and beaten by the Velas may not be representative of the overall level of the Ministry of Magic. For example, Hugo saw Peak, wearing aura robes, rush to the center of the field in the first match, and then easily knock out a dozen Velas and leprechauns. The players on the field were also affected by the melee, and their emotions were even more. Crumb was hit directly in the face by a bludger, and his nose was covered in blood, while the referee was mainly preoccupied because the tail of his broom was set on fire by a Vela. Finally, Lynch was the first to spot the golden snitch, but Crumb quickly noticed Lynch's movements and chased after him. The two swooped towards the ground like two peregrine falcons. Crumb is going to lose this time, Hermione suddenly said, because she found that after entering the dive, the distance between Crumb and Lynch remained the same, neither shrinking nor enlarging. Lynch's technique is not as good as Crumb's, but his Comet 300 is generally better than the Firebolt. Massachusetts quickly analyzed, especially since we optimized the diving performance, giving Lynch a greater advantage in the dive. When the ship girls were developing the brooms, they would naturally pay attention to diving, especially since they also had experts in diving flight like Enterprise, and these accumulated advantages quickly transformed into Lynch's advantage on the field. Now, although these advantages are very small, for these top athletes participating in top competitions, a little bit of advantage is enough to affect the outcome of the entire game. Sure enough, Lynch once again slammed heavily on the ground, and then Peak, who was closest to his landing point, rushed to his side in one stride, driving away the Velas who were surrounding him. Although Crumb pulled up at the last moment, he looked gloomy and empty-handed, obviously failing in the final competition. The scoreboard flashed the score: Bulgaria 10, Ireland 320. And the audience didn't seem to realize what was going on then. Slowly, like a giant jet plane accelerating, the murmur of the Irish supporters grew louder and louder, finally erupting into countless joyful shouts. "Ireland wins!" Bagman, an Irish supporter, shouted with an excited look on his face, obviously betting right in the game. Lynch caught the golden snitch, the great Irish seeker. He has made a contribution. He has inherited the glorious tradition of Irish wizards. Coach Uline and Scothach are possessed at this moment. Lynch alone represents the long history and tradition of Irish wizards. He is not alone in this battle. He is not alone. We've made a fortune this time. Unyielding and Massachusetts rushed over at this time and hugged Hugo, and then cheered, because everyone could see that the reason why Lynch was able to win in the end was because of the difference between the two brooms. And for the shipgirls who manufacture brooms, this means that they have gained a huge advantage in the competition among top broom manufacturers. And this advantage can be converted into more resources and more human resources. Just as the ship girls were discussing the benefits brought by this game, a Ministry of Magic staff member came in from outside the room to tell them that the award ceremony was about to begin. So Hugo and the others walked out of the room and came to the corridor. Through the window in the corridor, Hugo and the others watched the Irish team's players, accompanied by their mascots, circle the field and then land on the ground, looking like they were about to come up the stairs. However, the Bulgarian team arrived earlier, but when they passed in front of Hugo and the others, they looked more like a group of defeated roosters, and you could even hear someone sniffing. Compared to the original text, this time the Bulgarian team can be said to have suffered a crushing defeat. Especially as professionals. They could clearly see that the reason for losing so badly was closely related to their brooms. If losing because of inferior skills is acceptable, then failing because of poor equipment is too bad. Fortunately, the arrival of the Irish players later broke the dullness here. Aidan Lynch was supported by Moran and Connolly. Apparently the second fall seemed to have stunned him, and his eyes were scattered and dazed. But when Troy and Quigley raised the trophy high from Fudge's hands, and the audience erupted in thunderous applause and cheers, Lynch grinned and showed a smile. "This is a very exciting game. I think everyone will remember this game for a long time," Hugo muttered softly, watching the Irish team's players leave the box, take the trophy, and circle the field on their brooms. "Indeed, a very good game, but we are only spectators." Enterprise's voice rang in the Admiral's network. "But tonight should be our stage." Chapter 312 Riot. As Hugo and the ship girls emerged from their box, they happened to see the Weasley family also leaving their box. Upon meeting, the Weasley twins expressed their gratitude. "Good thing you stopped us from betting, or we would have lost all our capital," Fred said excitedly to Hugo. "I never thought Lin Key could actually catch the golden snitch before Crumb." "We always thought he was no match for Crumb," George said, shaking his head. "If we hadn't listened to you and bet, we would have lost all our money. Actually, I didn't think of that at the time. I just thought that if only Ludo was taking bets, there was a high probability he wouldn't be able to pay out if you won," Hugo said with a shrug and a smile. After leaving the stadium, Hugo and the others said goodbye to the Weasley family in Sirius, then headed towards their campsite. Amidst the hustle and bustle as they walked back along the lantern-lit path, rough voices sang in the night sky, and leprechauns darted back and forth above them, waving lanterns and cackling with laughter. Finally, Hugo and the others returned to the campsite. But no one planned to sleep. Instead, several aircraft carrier ship girls began launching planes to scout the area. "Is a war about to start? Who is the enemy?" Hermione asked, turning to Hugo with a bewildered look as St. George and several ship girls pointed at the sandbox in the tent. "We don't know who the enemy is yet, but this is just a drill for a possible emergency," Hugo said softly, then added, "Think of the Hillsborough Stadium disaster." The Hillsborough Stadium disaster occurred in 1989 when over 2,000 Liverpool fans surged into the standing room area during a match between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. The stadium, which could hold 54,000 people, was already near capacity, leading to a large-scale stampede in the crowded conditions, resulting in 96 fatalities. This event dominated the headlines of various British media outlets at the time. And Hermione was certainly aware of it, coupled with Britain's infamous football hooligans. So she quickly understood why everyone was so nervous. Everyone was assigned a task at this time. The main battleship ship girls were responsible for the assault task, controlling potential troublemakers. Hugo and the others were assigned marginalized tasks, such as guiding the crowd or rescuing people just in case. Hugo and the others simply didn't sleep, but instead chatted around the campfire outdoors. Doing so wasn't conspicuous at this time, as many people were not asleep even after 12 o'clock in the morning. They could hear singing and strange collisions coming from the various campsites not far away. Compared to the celebrations of ordinary people, the wizards' activities were obviously much louder. Venus said that Hogwarts will host the Triwizard Tournament, which has been suspended for hundreds of years, so Hogwarts will definitely be very lively this year, Intrepid said, drinking black tea and talking about some news circulating among the shipgirls. However, just as she was speaking, Javelin's voice suddenly rang out in the Admiral's network. "Someone is preparing to attack the campsite warden's family. We have already engaged them. Everyone, prepare to move out now." Enterprise took over command at this time and transmitted the information to everyone's ears through the Admiral's network under her command. Everyone except the rearguard drew their wands and rushed into the darkness outside the campsite. According to the plan, they would use this time difference to quickly deploy to the previously determined areas, so that they could carry out their tasks as soon as the riot spread. "It feels really exciting now," Hermione said as she walked with Hugo towards a nearby tent area. "How many times have you and everyone else carried out such tasks before?" 7 or 8 times, maybe. After all, It's impossible for everyone to obtain such a large family peacefully. And as the Admiral who can amplify everyone's strength, I sometimes have to help. Then I'll follow you in a while." After hearing her brother talk about his past experiences, Hermione took a breath and relaxed. After all, when facing the unknown, it is obviously better to have someone to guide you than to stumble around aimlessly. Just as Hugo and Hermione were chatting and heading towards their battle positions, the battle of the three ship girls working in the British Ministry of Magic had entered a fever pitch. The three ship girls used the warden's residence as cover, desperately resisting the dozen or so black-clad figures outside, wearing hoods and masks. Fortunately, because both sides were somewhat cautious at this time, everyone only used some simple spells and did not use too many large-scale destructive methods. The other party is now advancing towards the main camp area. After exchanging fire for 3 or 4 minutes, Javelin watched the gradually weakening spell attacks outside and quickly notified the others through the Admiral's network. The reason why this group of former Death Eaters did not choose to launch a strong attack was simple. After all, they just wanted to show their existence after drinking too much, so there was no need to fight to the death in this place. It's starting. When Hugo and Hermione received the notice from Javelin relayed by Enterprise, they had just arrived at a prearranged intersection and happened to see a ball of fire rising from not far away. With bursts of explosions and the flames rising, the camp area suddenly became chaotic. Countless people ran out of their tents, then began asking each other what had happened. However, they quickly realized that now was the time to run, because the flames and chaos were getting closer and closer, and only the woods seemed relatively safe. Everyone can go to the woods to hide for a while. Seeing everyone running around in a panic, Hugo and Hermione began to shout at the top of their lungs, perhaps because of the Order of Merlin, first-class medal hanging on Hugo's chest. The people around them subconsciously ignored their age after noticing this, and then followed Hugo and his sister's instructions to take refuge in the woods. However, even so, much chaos was still unavoidable, especially when the surrounding lights dimmed at this time, and the starting point of the fire got closer and closer to them. Everyone's anxiety became more and more intense. Finally, when a black-clad figure turned towards this area, everyone present could no longer restrain their inner tension and ran frantically towards the seemingly safe woods. Damn it! Seeing the situation on the field now, Hugo and Hermione rushed towards the black-clad figure, who was laughing wildly in a hoarse voice and setting the surroundings on fire. Just as they approached the black-clad figure, a blonde girl, who was obviously disoriented in the chaos, suddenly rushed out from the gap in a tent, and then was pushed by the crowd and fell not far from the black-clad figure. When the black-clad figure saw this scene, he immediately raised his wand and pointed it at the girl. Careful! Seeing this situation, Hermione's eyes widened suddenly and she released a stunning spell at the black-clad figure, then took advantage of the black-clad figure's dodge to quickly run a few steps to the girl's side. Chapter 313 Conflict. Seeing the two girls not far away, a cruel smile appeared under the black-robed figure's mask. However, just as he was about to cast a spell on the two girls, a beam of red light shot directly towards his face. The black-robed figure originally thought this was just an ordinary wizard trying to be a hero, so he drew his wand to block the attack. But he didn't expect the spell to be so fast and powerful, hitting him hard before he could react. Under Hermione's astonished gaze, the black-robed figure, who had just wanted to raise his wand to attack them, was sent flying directly from the ground, and then crashed heavily 7 or 8 meters away. When did I become so powerful? Seeing the effect of his attack, Hugo looked at his wand in surprise, because he never imagined that his strength could reach this level. But soon he realized that the reason he had always been at a disadvantage during practice was because his opponents were those ship girls, so naturally he was always being beaten during practice. However, in the duels with these experts, Hugo's own strength was also increasing day by day. This was why he was able to easily knock down a black wizard with obvious practical experience with just one blow. However, prolonged battles with ship girls also had a side effect, which was that his attacks were a bit too heavy. After all, in practice with ship girls, a spell without enough magic power couldn't even make the ship girl's body shake a little. But what he didn't expect was that this stunning spell, which would only make Firefly take a step back when cast on her, would be so powerful when cast on a person. Luna, what are you doing here? At this moment, Hermione helped up the girl who had fallen to the ground, and by the light of the burning tent, she discovered that it was actually her housemate, Luna Lovegood. I was just with my dad, but a group of panicked wizards pushed us apart. Luna showed a kind of nervous expression that she never usually had at this time, looking completely different from her usual ethereal feeling. It's okay. Your father will definitely not encounter any danger now. After hearing Luna talk about her and her father, Hermione comforted her in a low voice. "Those black wizards shouldn't have gone to your father's side, Luna." Luna, just as they were standing at this intersection waiting for 5 or 6 minutes, a somewhat flustered blonde middle-aged man suddenly rushed in from the side, calling Luna's name at the same time. Obviously, this middle-aged man in golden pajamas should be Luna's father, Lovegood. After his wife passed away, he had been living with his daughter ever since. This was why, knowing the dangerous situation, he rushed against the crowd to the scene of the accident, because he really couldn't bear the blow of something happening to his daughter. "Thank you so much." Seeing that his daughter was okay, Mr. Lovegood thanked Hugo and Hermione excitedly. "I was really scared just now, in case." "Okay, the matter is over now," Hugo comforted Mr. Lovegood, and then guided them to a safe forest to take refuge. After helping the tourists hide in the woods, Hugo and Hermione found an obstacle to hide behind. According to their idea, if there were any more attackers, they would be able to provide early warning for everyone. Just as Hugo and Hermione were rescuing Luna, a fierce battle broke out in the main battlefield in the distance. Compared to the short battle on Hugo's side, the main battlefield was obviously much bloodier. Although this group of people couldn't find muggles as their targets of violence, they still hung several people in midair. Among these people were not only muggle-born wizards, but also half-blood wizards, because they hung people in midair. Although the Ministry of Magic staff surrounded them with a loose encirclement, they didn't dare to rush over and cast spells on them. "What is that?" Just as Mr. Weasley was staring nervously at the hostages floating in the air, he suddenly noticed a black shadow flashing across the sky. This black shadow was Enterprise riding a Nimbus 3 broom. Seeing that the group of black wizards below hadn't reacted yet, she swooped down from the sky, grabbed the hostages, and quickly moved away from the group of black wizards. The black wizards, realizing that the amulet was about to be lost, immediately raised their wands and tried to shoot down Enterprise, but Enterprise endured 2 or 3 spells and successfully took the hostages away from the black wizards' attack range. Stupefy, seeing Enterprise successfully rescue the hostages, Javelin and the 3 little ones immediately drew their wands and used stunning spells on those who hadn't reacted, each stunning a black-robed figure who hadn't reacted. "What are you all standing there for? Why don't you hurry up and catch people?" After completing a round of attacks, Javelin shouted loudly at her colleagues next to her, who were in a state of confusion here. It must be said that since Voldemort failed in the First Wizarding War, the level of the Ministry of Magic staff has declined a lot in the past 10 years or so, to the point that they don't even know how to seize the opportunity to attack. Especially now, the Ministry of Magic staff surrounding this group of black-robed figures come from various different units, and are obviously just temporarily gathered together, which further deepens the chaos on the scene. As a result, Javelin's shout did indeed make the Ministry of Magic staff react. But it also woke up the Death Eaters. Compared to the chaotic members of the Ministry of Magic, this group of Death Eaters was far superior in terms of organization and combat effectiveness. Therefore, they retreated before the Ministry of Magic members could seal off the space, and even did not forget to take away their companions who had just been stunned. It's just that this group of people only carried out half of their plan to take away their companions, because 2 of the 3 people who had just been stunned were pulled out of a pile of black-robed figures by Javelin and the others using magic before they could be taken away. "Let me see who these are." Realizing that the black-robed figures had escaped, Madame Bones, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, walked to the 2 fallen people with an angry face, and then suddenly tore off the masks on their faces. It's Crabbe and Goyle. The moment the masks were torn off, several people around recognized the identities of the 2 fallen people. After all, the wizarding world is so small, and the core members of pure-blood families definitely know a lot of people. Very good. It seems that some people may have forgotten the power of the Ministry of Magic. After confirming the identities of the 2 attackers, Madame Bones said coldly, "Next, we need to make them recall these." Next, Madame Bones began to direct the temporarily assembled manpower to start the post-war cleanup activities. And Hugo and Hermione met Kingsley and handed over the black-robed figure they had just stunned to him. When Hermione and Hugo returned to the camp area, they found that everyone had basically finished and returned. "We got a letter of intent for an order from the Ministry of Magic." As soon as he sat down, Indomitable brought good news, because Enterprise managed to perfectly rescue the hostages under the premise of enduring several spells. She naturally received a lot of curious gazes after landing with the hostages in a safe location. Fortunately, Enterprise had prepared for this in advance, and she was wearing an amulet made by Indomitable. Although the dense spells had already damaged the amulet due to the magic circuit overload, The Ministry of Magic personnel could still see the effect of the amulet compared to those top-level amulets circulating among pure-blood wizards. These amulets were obviously much worse, but if you consider that they can be mass-produced in small batches using common magical materials, these amulets are obviously very suitable for the daily use of ordinary wizards. Therefore, after inquiring about the price of these amulets, the Ministry of Magic quickly prepared to purchase a batch and equip Aurors and some elite hit wizards. Chapter 314 End of Vacation. In the latter half of the night, everything quieted down. For Hugo, the biggest gain was the final calculation of the fate points earned from the previous series of events due to the relatively large changes in the overall plot. Everything he had done during this period earned him a total of 13 fate points. However, just like at the beginning of his second year, the price for obtaining these fate points was the loss of control over the plot. For example, he now knew for sure that Barty Crouch Sr. had been controlled, but he couldn't find Voldemort's location at all. At least Voldemort hadn't gone to the Riddle House yet. Of course, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. At least the original gatekeeper who was supposed to be killed was still alive, reducing the loss of an innocent life. But the problem was that this meant the overall situation this year was likely to be vastly different from what Hugo remembered, which meant he lost his initial advantage. However, unlike his second year, Hugo felt much more relaxed than he had a few years ago, because he now possessed enough power to deal with any unexpected events. Let's just take it one step at a time, Hugo sighed finally, lying in bed with his eyes closed, reviewing everything. The worst-case scenario is just flipping the table and starting a war. Early the next morning, they chose to report back to London, and then dispersed to take care of their own affairs. For example, Indomitable needed to handle her order from the Ministry of Magic. After having breakfast with her parents that morning, Hermione and Hugo headed straight to Hood's workshop. As soon as they opened the door, they heard Hood's voice. The Ministry of Magic is still playing dead as usual, Hood said, slamming the copy of the Daily Prophet she was holding onto the table. Is this just a random, isolated incident? No, it fully demonstrates that after more than a decade of recuperation since the end of the war, those Death Eaters from back then are ready to launch a second war to reclaim everything. The ship girls, who had personally witnessed the outbreak of World War II, were much more vigilant in this regard than others. They even believed that even if Voldemort couldn't be resurrected, war could break out within 5 years. The credibility of things like the Daily Prophet is often fatally flawed. We'd better trust our own information channels. By the way, have Javelin and the others sent back any intelligence? Hugo asked after entering the room. They received commendations, but they still can't escape over time, Hood said in a slightly sarcastic tone. Although this riot was quickly quelled, it did cause the British Ministry of Magic to lose face internationally. So now Fudge has arranged a lot of work, as if doing so could restore their reputation. Fortunately, Javelin and the others are undertaking patrol missions, so they can take turns going to coffee shops or fast food restaurants to rest during their shifts, as long as they are careful not to talk about anything related to wizards when ordinary people are around. Knock, knock, knock. Just as Hugo and the others were discussing recent events at the Ministry of Magic, several owls landed on the windowsill, tapping on the window with their beaks. Ah, it seems everyone's shopping lists have arrived this year, Hood said, turning around and opening the window to let in the owls huddled together on the windowsill. Fireflies, Venetos, Admirals, Hermione's. And, Hood paused, because she remembered that only 4 people in the house would receive letters from Hogwarts, not 5. Let me see. Hugo reacted at this moment and came closer to take a look. The instant he saw Cyclone's name, he immediately contacted the new system spirit in his soul. Are you saying this letter is mine? Soon, Ayla, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl, hopped out of a golden door and took the letter to read with everyone. The letter was exactly the same as the one Hugo and the others had received in their first year, except that the name at the top was Ayla Dumbledore. Hopefully, our headmaster doesn't have any cardiovascular problems, Hermione said softly, looking at the letter from Hogwarts and then at Ayla, who looked at least 90% similar to Ariana's portrait in the Hogshead pub. Oh, right, according to the Enterprise. These lists are all automatically written by the Quill of Acceptance and the Book of Admittance, and Professor McGonagall doesn't even look at the names when she signs them, Hood added at this moment. Moreover, according to the school's arrangements we received earlier, Ayla's guide this time is Enterprise. In other words, we should be able to give the headmaster a surprise at the opening ceremony. Hopefully, it won't be a shock. Hugo wasn't sure what Dumbledore would think when he saw this younger version of his sister, but he knew this year's opening ceremony would definitely be interesting in the following period. Hugo returned to his routine of training at Hood's place during the day and going home at night. After that night riot, he realized the benefits of training, so he naturally became more proactive in his practice. In addition, Hugo and the Weasley twins, who came to work part-time, also gathered together to create a lot of prank gadgets in their spare time. Of course, Indomitable also helped a lot in this research process. Compared to enthusiasts like Fred and George, a professional like Indomitable was obviously much better at this. Therefore, as the start of school approached, the twins had experimented with almost half of their previous ideas and selected some of them as candidates for future products. Of course, the reason why Indomitable supported them was also very simple. The Weasley twins promised Indomitable that she could obtain no more than half of the shares of their future store through capital injection. Although the Weasley twins thought Indomitable was acting like an angel investor, for the ship girls, getting 49% of the shares in the initial stage was definitely a big win. "Thank you so much, we would have been in trouble this year if it weren't for your help," the Weasley twins came to thank them on the afternoon of the last day before the end of the holiday. "What's there to thank?" Hugo asked curiously. If he remembered correctly, all Hood and the others had done was provide the Weasley twins with a summer job and pay them on time, because we have to buy dress robes this year, which means the school will be holding a ball. And the money earned during the summer is enough for us to buy a very nice set of dress robes, Fred explained. "That's right, unlike our unfortunate brother who can only buy those unwanted second-hand dress robes. He looks like he walked out of a painting from hundreds of years ago." George laughed at this moment. In fact, they had invited their brother to come over before. But Ron was directly eliminated because his repairing charm and cleaning charm levels were not good enough, and his potion-making level was also not high. "Then I wish you all the best at the ball this year," Hugo said to the twins. "Then let's meet at King's Cross Station tomorrow." Chapter 315 School starts. It was the annual start of term day. But the weather was terrible. Hugo woke up to see torrential rain lashing against the window after breakfast. Mr. Granger decided to drive his children to King's Cross Station in London, and Mrs. Granger would naturally go with him. So, after packing everything up, they drove their car towards central London. But unfortunately, the closer they got to the city centre, the heavier the rain became. When they got out of the car at King's Cross Station, the rain was much heavier than it had been at home, so heavy that they couldn't even see the view outside the car windows. As soon as they opened the car door, raindrops pelted them. By the time they had carried their trunks through the busy streets and into the station, they were soaked to the bone. The weather was terrible. Upon entering platform 9 3/4, they could see many Hogwarts students and parents on the platform, looking like dark shadows obscured by the thick smoke billowing from the train's engine. After saying goodbye to their parents, Hugo and his friends joined Vendito and the others in a compartment. They could just make out the faint sound of the wheel-eyes talking not far away. For example, Charlie was being very mysterious when he hugged his sister Ginny goodbye, hinting that he might see everyone at school again very soon. Just then, the whistle blew to signal the train's departure, so he only had time to tell his twin brothers that Hogwarts might be hosting some major event this year. Soon, the train started moving. After waving goodbye to the familiar faces on the platform, Hugo began to think about the information he had gathered during the second half of the holidays. In fact, there was some rather suspicious information. For example, a Ministry of Magic employee was attacked in Nocturne Alley and lost a portion of their memory later. The Aurors at the Ministry of Magic discovered through clues that this employee had been attacked by a dark wizard while purchasing some kind of illicit item. The dark wizard had fled before the Aurors arrived. To escape punishment for such a minor case, the Aurors simply issued a warrant for the dark wizard and didn't pursue it further. After all, there were dozens of such petty crimes in Nocturne Alley every day, and the Aurors couldn't possibly handle them all. But for Hugo, this was a dangerous omen, especially since the attacked Ministry of Magic employee worked in the Department of International Magical Cooperation and knew that the Triwizard Tournament would be held this year. This indicated that Voldemort, hidden in the shadows, already had some followers at his disposal and would likely use the Triwizard Tournament to complete his resurrection. For a normal person, the enemy's blood needed for resurrection would likely be obtained by simply finding someone they hated, shedding their blood as quickly as possible to avoid any complications. But Voldemort was different. He had a very strong Chuanibayao vibe and was a detail-oriented maniac, so he would definitely insist on using 100% Harry Potter's blood to achieve that sense of ritual and obtain the best resurrection experience. Even more interesting, Harry and Ron walked in from outside and told Hugo that he had a dream during the summer in which someone was being interrogated with Veritaserum, while another person was being killed. Ron and Hermione just thought Harry was too stressed. But Hugo and the ship girls knew that this meant Voldemort's return was on a countdown. However, he didn't reveal this, because the plot had already changed. Without knowing where the enemy was lurking, saying this would have no effect other than creating a tense atmosphere. Aside from that, the journey was very peaceful, except for Malfoy coming in to provoke them. However, what Malfoy said was indeed hurtful, and Ron was still sulking when the train arrived at Hogsmeade Station. The weather outside was as bad as Ron's mood. Even though they had taken the train from the south of England to the north, the weather had not improved, and could even be said to be worse. The rain was heavy and fierce, as if buckets of icy water were constantly being poured over their heads. It looked like the whole world was soaked in water. Even worse, Hugo learned that Moody was doing well during this time, and there were no reports of any attacks. This meant that Voldemort had chosen a plan that Hugo didn't know about to launch his attack. Hagrid, good evening. Just as Hugo was thinking, Hermione suddenly greeted a dark figure in the distance. Hello, Hermione, and Hugo, Hagrid replied in a booming voice, waving his hand. See you at the feast, if we don't drown. Oh my goodness, taking a small boat across the lake in this weather. It would probably be very dangerous without magic, Hermione said, looking through the carriage window at Hagrid leading the first-year students towards the lake, with a sense of wonder. Before they got off the train, they had specifically cast warming and waterproofing charms on Ella, but the current weather still made them feel a little uneasy. Of course, this uneasiness was just a feeling. Even though Ella was the only non-ship girl among Hugo's subordinates, Ella was as safe as being at home on the water. Actually, it has always been a high-risk ritual, especially in bad weather. Even with magic, it's dangerous. I remember a boat capsizing in this kind of weather once. Luckily, the giant squid in the lake rescued everyone in time. Luna's somewhat ethereal voice came from beside them. Luna had also boarded the carriage with Hugo and his sister. After all, the weather was bad today, so everyone tended to squeeze together when riding in the carriages. Also, thank you very much for saving me during the summer, Luna said, smiling at Hugo and his sister sitting opposite her. My father hopes to invite you to our house when you have time. When everyone arrived at the castle and walked into the entrance hall, several large red water balloons fell from the sky. Luckily, Hugo and his friends drew their wands in time to block the attack. When they looked up, they saw Peeves flying around the Great Hall, surrounded by more of the same water-filled red balloons. Peeves represents the soul of all the suppressed emotions of the children in this school, similar to a Dementor. So, unlike other ghosts, he can pick up various objects but can also be attacked by them. However, because Peeves has been around for so long, even when Dumbledore was a student, Peeves was already here. The teachers only manage Peeves to a limited extent, preventing him from going too far. Of course, this is also due to the fact that Peeves is directly bound to Hogwarts Castle. As long as the castle exists, Peeves will continue to exist. The chaos in the Great Hall also attracted Professor McGonagall, and under Professor McGonagall's reprimand, Peeves had to quickly drop the water-filled balloons he was carrying and leave the hall. After everyone entered the Great Hall, the older students from each house began to help the younger students tidy up their clothes after drying them. After all, it wouldn't be appropriate to look sloppy for the start of term feast. The Great Hall was as magnificent as ever, and was specially decorated for the start of term feast. Hundreds of candles floated in the air above the tables, illuminating the golden plates and goblets. However, as Hugo and the ship girls looked at this warm scene, they felt a sense of melancholy in their hearts, because this scene was likely the last peaceful start of term before the war. Chapter 316 Banquet. After tidying up their appearances, everyone quickly began sharing stories and chatting about their summer vacations. It was at this moment that they noticed a scarred, elderly man sitting in the Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher's seat on the platform. His face was covered in scars, his mouth was like a crooked gash, and the place where his nose should have been was simply gone. Even more terrifying was his bizarre, blue, artificial eye. This appearance caught the attention of many. Luna, after seeing him, whispered, "The Defense Against the Dark Arts professor is Mad-Eye Moody? My dad once said he was a true hero in that war, Mad-Eye Moody." "So that's Mad-Eye Moody," Cho Chang exclaimed softly beside her. "My parents think highly of him, which is normal, since he filled half the cells in Azkaban. It's just that, due to his special career, he has many enemies. Multiple assassination attempts have slowly made him a bit neurotic. He retired after someone tried to shake his hand, but he mistook it for an attack and injured them. I never thought Dumbledore would invite him to be the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor this year. Looks like he has PTSD, Veneto suddenly muttered softly at this moment. What's that?" Now it was Cho Chang's turn to be confused. as this wasn't a term from the wizarding world. Post-traumatic stress disorder, often found in people who have experienced war. Their past experiences make them irritable, hypervigilant, forgetful, and easily startled, Hermione explained from the side. After becoming a ship girl, she had read many such miscellaneous books. Indeed, Moody is just like that. After listening to Hermione's description, several people around nodded in agreement with her point of view. Soon, the doors of the Great Hall were opened, and everyone immediately quieted down, ready to welcome the new school year as usual. Hagrid led a group of freshers into the hall, but unlike previous years, this year's freshers were shivering more noticeably, as the weather was truly terrible. The Sorting Hat, with its 1,000-year history, was once again brought out and sang a new song. But honestly, this smelly, long, and off-key song was truly torturous to the ears. With great difficulty, the song ended, and everyone applauded to express their happiness at the return of peace to their ears. As one new student after another was called up, the Sorting Hat began to sort the new students as usual, while the older students below began to whisper and discuss these newcomers. Soon, the list reached Ayla Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall read out the student's name as before, but immediately reacted after finishing the name and subconsciously turned to look at Dumbledore, and Dumbledore's expression at this time was even more exaggerated. The moment he saw Ayla's face, his whole body froze there, and then he grabbed a table with both hands and leaned forward slightly. Ravenclaw, the Hat shouted only a second or two after being placed on Ayla's head. After hearing the house she would ultimately go to, Ayla politely returned the hat to Professor McGonagall and sat down opposite Hugo. "It feels so good to be in the same house as my sisters," Ayla said as soon as she sat down, hugging Venedo's arm. "Sister?" Cho Chang looked at Venedo, then at Ayla, and asked curiously, because the two didn't look like sisters at all in terms of appearance. "Of course, she's my sister. Because the sister who raised me is very close to Hood. I've known Venedo and the others since I was little," Ayla explained to the people around her. "Look, Professor Dumbledore is looking at Ayla," Hermione said to Hugo through the Admiral network at this time. Hearing this, Hugo raised his head and looked towards the staff table, and sure enough, he saw Dumbledore looking this way. Fortunately, Headmaster Dumbledore was also a centenarian and had experienced many storms. So, by the time the sorting ceremony was about to end, Professor Dumbledore had finally returned to his usual state. "By the way, what's your relationship with Headmaster Dumbledore?" It was at this moment that Marietta asked Ayla, because in the wizarding world, the surname Dumbledore was very rare. "There shouldn't be any relationship. I'm an orphan and was adopted when I was very young. And this name was attached to a note in my swaddling clothes," Ayla said according to the arranged identity. "So that's how it is." Feeling that her gossipy heart had been satisfied, Marietta nodded. But before she could ask the next question, the sorting ceremony ended when Professor McGonagall left with his sorting hat and the stool. Dumbledore stood up, and then he simply smiled at all the students, opened his arms, and made a welcoming gesture. "I only have 2 words to say to you," he said, his sonorous voice echoing in the hall. "Eat." No wonder Dumbledore could become a respected headmaster, because he knew that in this situation, what everyone needed was a hot dinner rather than listening to some lengthy speech. For a moment, the entire hall was quiet, with only the sound of knives and forks colliding with plates and the sound of chewing. After all, today's heavy rain made everyone feel cold and hungry, so they couldn't wait to eat something hot. On this situation, everyone ate much faster than usual. Soon, everyone was full, and as the last of the desserts were cleared away, Dumbledore's voice rang out again in the hall for Hugo, who had attended the opening ceremony 4 times including this one. He began to use this opportunity to clear his mind and rest for a while, because according to convention, what followed were all cliches. Sure enough, the headmaster routinely mentioned the contraband that could not be carried this year and the areas that were forbidden to go to, and then introduced the new defense against the dark arts professor to everyone. The students were still very interested in Hogwarts' specialty, the annual defense against the dark arts professor, but after Moody's introduction, there was only scattered applause. Hugo glanced at Moody above and saw his magic eye spinning wildly, constantly scanning the students below and the professors next to him. After observing Moody on the stage for a few seconds, Moody seemed to sense something and turned his magic eye over. Seeing this, Hugo could only quickly turn his gaze elsewhere. Although the information obtained from the summer vacation showed that this Moody was likely not replaced, the ship girls should still conduct several rounds of reconnaissance after the start of school to ensure that there were no problems in this place. Because everyone had eaten a relatively full dinner, everyone felt a little tired, and many people even became drowsy. At this time, Dumbledore suddenly released an explosive piece of news. I must also regretfully inform everyone that the House Cup Quidditch tournament will not be held this year." Boom. The entire hall was in an uproar. As everyone knows, the only sport in the wizarding world is Quidditch. Dumbledore's words were equivalent to a middle school principal telling the students that all physical education classes were cancelled this year if it weren't for his high prestige. It was estimated that the whole place would be filled with protests. Soon, everyone quieted down, waiting for Dumbledore to explain further. Chapter 317 School starts. The students erupted into an uproar the moment Headmaster Dumbledore announced the cancellation of the Quidditch Cup for the year. Fortunately, the headmaster didn't disappoint them and quickly cleared his throat to explain. This is because a large event will begin in October and continue throughout the school year, taking up much of the teacher's time and energy, but I believe you will all derive great enjoyment from it. I am very pleased to announce that Hogwarts will have the distinct honor of hosting a very exciting event in the coming months, an event which has not been held for over a century. It gives me great pleasure to inform you that the Triwizard Tournament will be held at Hogwarts this year. Perhaps sensing everyone's keen interest in the matter, Dumbledore didn't beat around the bush but delivered the news in one go. "Oh no, are you joking?" Fred exclaimed. Looking shocked, "I am not joking, Mr. Weasley," Dumbledore said with a smile. "However, since you mentioned joking, I did hear a rather amusing joke about a troll, a harpy, and a leprechaun who all walked into the same tavern." Well, it's clear that Dumbledore is a humorous man, but this was hardly the time for it. Thankfully, Professor McGonagall's cough rang out at the opportune moment, rescuing the headmaster's topic from going astray. Under Professor McGonagall's supervision, the headmaster finally gave those unfamiliar with the competition a proper explanation of the Triwizard Tournament, including its history and some news from previous competitions. Even Hugo and the ship girls, who already knew the details of this year's competition, listened attentively to the entire speech, not missing a single word. "Well, now, it's getting late, and it's important that you all enter your classes tomorrow morning feeling refreshed and clear-headed. Off to bed with you." Chop chop. Having finished his announcements, Dumbledore sat down and turned to talk to Mad-Eye Moody. The great hall filled with the sounds of scraping benches and chattering as students stood up and surged towards the double doors leading into the entrance hall. Many were discussing what Dumbledore had just said. Even from several people away, Hugo could hear one of the Weasley twins loudly voicing his objections to the age limit. "Do you think everyone will want to participate in this competition?" Hermione inquired through the Admiral network. Having fully experienced the ship girls' combat capabilities, she felt that if they participated, they would likely win. If there really is a competition, it would be more appropriate to let Veneto compete. Hugo had actually discussed this matter with everyone long ago, and Veneto, as the only battleship ship girl among the students, naturally became the only choice. In fact, Hugo had originally intended to participate in the competition himself. After all, with his current level, winning the competition wouldn't be too difficult, and with a little caution, there wouldn't be any danger. However, as soon as he expressed this idea, the ship girls shut it down, because they felt that they should be the ones to do such things, not the Admiral himself. With that, Hugo naturally couldn't go against the girls' good intentions, so in the end, he could only decide to let Veneto participate in this competition. The Triwizard Tournament was so captivating that even the usually laid-back Ravenclaws discussed it in the common room after returning after a brief discussion. Everyone came up with more than a dozen plans, ranging from using aging potions and Polyjuice Potion to finding older students to help, but they also acknowledged that it was unlikely that these things could bypass the judges of such an international competition. After a lively discussion, everyone went to bed, as everyone was tired after traveling in the wind and rain all day. Especially since there were classes tomorrow, and no one wanted to be caught out by the professors in the first class. The first week of classes after the start of the semester was very conducive to weight loss. Whether it was squeezing pus from bulbs in herbology or trying to raise Hagrid's blast-ended scroots, they were all disgusting projects that made people lose their appetite, especially Hagrid's blast-ended scroots, not to mention how he bred these things. In Hugo's eyes, his breeding was completely in the wrong direction. Why did he have to breed the blast-ended scroots in a ferocious direction? Blast-ended scroots clearly looked like deformed, shelled lobsters. If they were bred for food, wouldn't it be better to remove the fishy smell and enhance the taste? After all, Hugo felt that the best seafood was the kind of fish without bones or shrimp without shells. After catching them, whether steamed, braised, or coated with flour and eggs and fried in oil, they would be very fragrant. Even if these things could grow as big as a small house and grow shells after adulthood, it would be easier to peel them when they were big. Just imagine, if such a large animal was slaughtered, It could probably feed hundreds of people, so after class, Hugo shared this idea with Hagrid. Hagrid was a little surprised after hearing Hugo's idea, because it clearly didn't fit his habit of breeding animals. However, after Hugo's repeated persuasion, he finally agreed to try breeding them according to Hugo's idea when the time came, because even someone like Hagrid hoped that his little darlings could be recognized by the public. As an old man in his 60s, Hagrid, even though his intelligence was hampered by his giant bloodline, still clearly understood that the things he raised might not be in line with the public's orientation. Therefore, after Hugo told the facts and reasons, he also realized that if he could breed a valuable edible animal, it might really allow everyone to accept him. So he naturally paid attention to this aspect. Time quickly came to Wednesday. When Hugo and the others finished their ancient runes class in the morning and came to the entrance hall to prepare for dinner, they found that the entrance hall was crowded with people. Several Slytherin students were excitedly talking about something about Malfoy and the others, while each of them held a copy of the Daily Prophet in their hands. What happened? Hugo turned to Veneto next to him and asked, because there were too many people nearby and he couldn't hear what the Slytherins were shouting. The trial of Crabbe and Goyle, the Death Eaters who were captured in the chaos after the Quidditch World Cup, has ended. The Ministry of Magic has only fined them 300 galleons each, compensated each victim 100 galleons, and publicly apologized. Veneto raised her voice slightly and said in a somewhat cold tone, "This is the view of some pure-blood wizards on half-bloods and mudbloods. Even if you were hung in the sky, they will only give you 100 galleons as if they were giving alms to beggars. Because in their eyes, other people are just their servants. Even with such a ruling that favors the attackers, these pure-blood families will still not be satisfied. On the contrary, they will think that the Ministry of Magic is biased towards the mudbloods and is humiliating these ancient pure-blood families." Because Veneto deliberately didn't control her voice, the voice spread throughout the entrance hall in an instant. So when they walked into the Great Hall, they left a group of people behind them who were lost in thought. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 318, Defense Against the Dark Arts. After listening to Veneto's speech, quite a few Slytherins stepped forward, seemingly wanting to reason with her. However, Veneto glared at them, stopping them in their tracks because the moment their eyes met, these Slytherin students felt as if they were in a sea of corpses and blood. The fact that they didn't collapse on the spot already showed their strong willpower. The Ministry of Magic is really going too far with some of their actions now, Hermione said with dissatisfaction after sitting down at the table. She once thought that becoming a high-ranking official in the Ministry of Magic would allow her to change the wizarding world, but now it seemed like just a fantasy. When it comes to pure-blood families, the Ministry of Magic is always like this, Hugo said with a smile, as a reaction to his sister's naive thoughts. Think about the Death Eaters in the last war. Soon, most of the students walked into the Great Hall and began to eat lunch, while also whispering about what had happened in the entrance hall earlier, and occasionally glancing at Veneto. After finishing lunch, Hugo and the others went to the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, and together with the Slytherin students, they welcomed their first Defense Against the Dark Arts class of the year because they had already heard about Professor Moody's reputation from the students who had taken his class before. They all honestly took out the dark forces, a guide to self-protection after entering the classroom and sat in their seats, waiting. The atmosphere was particularly quiet soon. They heard Moody's very distinctive thumping footsteps coming down the corridor. He walked into the classroom, looking as strange and frightening as usual. They could clearly see his claw-like wooden legs sticking out from under his robe. "Put those things away," he said gruffly, hobbling to the teacher's table with his staff and sitting down. "Those textbooks, you won't need them in this class." After hearing Professor Moody's words, the students put away the books in their hands. Most of them had expressions of excitement and curiosity, while a few had complex expressions. This situation arose because both Ravenclaw and Slytherin had a high proportion of purebloods, so the number of students whose families had Death Eaters wasn't small, and many of those Death Eaters had been caught by Moody under everyone's curious or awed gazes. Moody took out the register, shook his head, swept his long, white hair from his twisted, scarred face, and began to call out names. His normal eye moved down the list, while his magical eye swiveled around, staring at each student who responded. "All right," he said when the last student had responded. "I received a letter from Professor Lupin introducing the situation of this course. According to Professor Lupin's description in the letter, you have already mastered a lot of basic knowledge about how to deal with dark magic creatures, thanks to having a good teacher last year. Hearing this, many students modestly nodded in agreement, but what I want to say is, most of what you have learned is useless. Suddenly, Moody changed his tone and raised his voice. Hearing this, the students sitting in their seats almost simultaneously raised their heads and looked at Moody, with expressions of doubt on their faces. Listen to me first, and refute me after you've heard everything. Moody stood on the platform and made a gesture to calm them down. Then continued, you think you've mastered a lot, but what you will face in the future are not those low-level dark creatures. Those thrown onto the battlefield in the war included, but were not limited to, werewolves, giants, controlled fire dragons, vampires, and even Death Eaters. But there isn't a war going on now, Marietta said softly at this time. And according to the news from the Ministry of Magic, Britain won't break out into war in a short time. Yes, most people might think so. But do you think that's really the case? Moody scanned the classroom with both his eyes, and then said, 3 years ago, your defense against the dark arts professor, Quirrell, died. 2 years ago, a basilisk almost caused major casualties in the school. Last year, someone escaped from Azkaban, and Dementors were attacking many innocent people. And this year, I think you all heard about what happened at the World Cup. Speaking of this, many people looked at Hugo and Hermione, because during that chaos, they not only helped innocent people escape, but also captured a dark wizard who caused the chaos. So, our world is not safe. Moody raised his voice at this time, saying, do you still think danger is far away from you? All the students in the classroom put away their previous indifferent expressions, and everyone looked much more serious. Seeing this, Moody nodded with satisfaction, and then suddenly asked, so, who among you knows which spells are subject to the most severe punishment under wizarding law? Many students raised their hands, and Moody scanned the area below the platform and pointed to Hermione, who was the first to raise her hand. Miss Granger, your answer, the Imperious Curse, the Cruciatus Curse, and the Killing Curse? Hermione answered quickly. These 3 spells are called the Unforgivable Curses, and anyone who uses any of them on a person will be sentenced to life imprisonment in Azkaban. That's right. These 3 spells were the most frequently used and most dangerous spells in the Wizarding Wars. After Hermione answered, Moody nodded with satisfaction. For example, the last war was like this. Every spell brought a lot of trouble to the Ministry of Magic. A sneer appeared on Moody's face, and then he took out a row of glass bottles containing spiders from the drawer of the podium. Next, Moody demonstrated the power of the 3 unforgivable curses. At first, everyone thought it was a bit interesting. But when Moody asked everyone to associate these magical effects with people, everyone became nervous. Moody's teaching method really hasn't changed much, Veneto said to Hugo through the Admiral network at this time. Javelin was the last batch of Aurors that Moody trained. She said that Moody's first lesson at that time was to tell them how terrible these spells were. If I had to say there was any difference, it would only be that at least in this class, Moody didn't mention the list of Aurors who had died in the line of duty since he joined, and how they died. Now it seems that Headmaster Dumbledore has also realized that war is coming. Evil Name's voice also sounded in the Admiral network at this time. Otherwise, he wouldn't have found a practical teacher to teach us like this. It must be said that although Professor Moody is not very good at teaching students, the combat knowledge he has mastered is enough to rouse the interest of us students. Therefore, when the class bell rang, almost everyone had an expression of unfinished business on their faces when leaving the classroom. Everyone gathered in 2s and 3s to discuss the content of today's class. Hugo and the others were naturally no exception, but Hermione quickly shifted the topic to content related to exams. Do you think the 5th year and 7th year students this year will also learn these things? After all, they are facing important exams this year. It's hard to say, because the teaching content of the courses in the school is selected by the professors themselves. Hugo shook his head. But what I can be sure of is that Moody's level should take these things into consideration, so that everyone won't fail the exam. Chapter 319 Classroom and After Class. It must be said that Professor Moody's first lesson left a deep impression on everyone, but most Ravenclaws believe that Moody's next lesson would at most teach spells similar to the Stupefy or Protego. After all, the Unforgivable Curses were not required for either the OWLS or NEWTS exams. Learning them would be more likely to get you directly admitted to Azkaban. However, it wasn't until the next day that Hugo and the others learned that, in the 7th year advanced class, Moody had specifically invited Enterprise as his assistant to demonstrate how to fight. and they had a battle demonstration on the lawn, which ended in a draw. After the battle, Moody greatly praised Enterprise in the teacher's lounge, considering her a fully qualified, even excellent, Auror, and expressed regret that she had chosen to leave the profession. Now I can confirm that the other party is most likely the real Moody, because the flask he carries contains butterbeer, not Polyjuice potion, Enterprise said to Hugo through the Admiral network after the exchange. Butterbeer. After hearing Enterprise's words, Hugo specifically confirmed it again, because in his eyes, this drink was completely inconsistent with Moody's tough guy image. That's normal. After all, Moody is an experienced old Auror, so he certainly wouldn't drink alcoholic beverages that would affect his reaction speed, Enterprise explained. Understanding Hugo's thoughts, I also observed the other party. The other party's behavior does conform to the characteristics of an old Auror who has survived hundreds of battles, and this aspect is very difficult for outsiders to imitate. For the ship girls, their senses, far superior to those of humans, allowed them to observe many things that normal humans would not notice, so their reports in this regard were obviously more authentic. However, this was not good news for Hugo, because it meant that a real enemy was likely lurking in the dark, ready to strike a fatal blow at any time. Fortunately, if that enemy were to launch a fatal blow, the primary target would inevitably be Harry, so Hugo didn't need to worry too much about this for the time being. For the next 2 weeks, Hugo seemed a little busy. In addition to ordinary schoolwork, he also needed to spend a lot of time with the Weasley twins and create some special experimental products because the twins had received guidance from Unyielding during the summer vacation. They had come up with a large number of new ideas that required Hugo to help them experiment during this period. In these experiments, Hugo's main task was to analyze the effects of the items they made and then screen out the most suitable formula. Seriously, Hugo, if it weren't for your help, our next work would definitely be 100 times more difficult than it is now, Fred said loudly in an exaggerated tone as Hugo simply analyzed the appropriate component ratio of the puking pastilles. Using alchemical analysis, the reason the twins were so excited was very simple. If Hugo hadn't used alchemy to help, the twins would have had to experiment on themselves to figure out the detailed ratios. In other words, with the help of Hugo's alchemy, Fred and George were able to skip a lot of human experimentation and get results directly during the research process. That's right. And our research progress has also greatly improved, George said at this time. Now we can skip the time it takes to explore the specific situation of the formula and directly conduct large-scale experiments on volunteers. You're not planning to do this at school, are you? Hugo thought of what the Weasley twins had done in the original text, so he spoke out to dissuade them. I don't think it's appropriate to experiment on classmates. Then what do you say we should do? Fred said with a depressed face. After all, our prank gadgets are for students, so the experimental data also needs to be obtained from students. You can find Miss Unyielding and the others to cooperate, Hugo suggested. Sometimes cooperation is not a bad thing, and after you get in touch with Unyielding, you can also organize mass production and sales through their channels. That's indeed a good idea, but we need to discuss it carefully, Fred said with a thoughtful look on his face after hearing Hugo's words. They really hadn't thought about this direction before. After all, even if their business was good in the future, they were only 6th-year students now, so they hadn't thought of this kind of business cooperation method before. Of course, Hugo also knew that the Weasley twins would definitely think about it carefully in this situation, because it was closely related to their future, so he changed the subject. By the way, I heard you keep saying that Moody's upcoming Defense Against the Dark Arts lessons are very exciting. What's going on? He wouldn't be teaching you the unforgivable curses, would he? Of course not. Moody wouldn't even use the unforgivable curses in the era when Aurors were allowed to use this type of dark magic, so how could he teach this to students now? George shook his head and said, but you'll have to see for yourself what it is, Fred said with a smile on his face. I can only say that the course will be open to all students above the 3rd grade and will be an unprecedented course. Just as Hugo had guessed before, Moody was indeed training the students as Aurors. For example, only one of the 2 weekly classes would involve theoretical teaching, while the other would be practical teaching. Since demonstrating some of his practical skills in the first practical class, Moody's favorite thing to do now was to pick 2 of Hugo, Hermione, and Veneto to come on stage for a practical demonstration. This day was another practical class. Hugo thought that this class might be learning the simple combined use of magic in actual combat, but as soon as the class started, Moody announced shocking news. In today's class, he would take turns casting the Imperious Curse on each student to demonstrate the power of the spell and see if everyone could resist its influence. But that's illegal. Professor, Hermione said loudly as Moody waved his wand, moving the desks to the side and leaving a large open space in the center of the classroom. Of course I know, Professor Moody said at this time, taking out a piece of parchment from his arms. But I have already obtained permission from the Ministry of Magic and Headmaster Dumbledore. As he spoke, Professor Moody tapped the parchment with his wand and then enlarged it and hung it on the blackboard. Everyone saw the Ministry of Magic's approval and the shiny seal at the end on the parchment. It's good that Miss Granger can remain vigilant at this time, Moody said, looking at the students below. Because many criminals use their status to carry out many illegal activities, of course. Given that this magic may indeed be difficult for some people to accept, I will allow those who do not want to try to leave now, but I need to remind everyone that this method of learning is indeed difficult to accept, but it is much better than learning through more cruel methods, waiting for someone to cast this spell on you and completely control you in their hands. Chapter 320 Courses and Notices. After announcing the content of the class, Moody stood quietly at the podium, waiting for everyone to make their choice. Soon, a Slytherin student stood up and left the classroom, followed by about a third of the students leaving in succession. Very well, that's a wise choice, Moody said, closing the door. I can't expect everyone to be a warrior. Cowardly and incompetent people joining the team will only kill everyone. Moody didn't find it abnormal that some people chose to leave. As an Auror and a professor, he knew that his subject was indeed a bit beyond the syllabus. Now, let's begin. After confirming that no one else wanted to leave, Moody closed the door of the room and said to the students who remained. The students who remained seemed eager to try, because many of them felt that they were gifted geniuses and might be able to easily block this infamous curse, but in reality, the situation was completely different from what everyone thought. As one of the 3 unforgivable curses, this spell was definitely not so easy to block. So, throughout the class, with Professor Moody's spellcasting, most of the students had no resistance at all and made all kinds of abnormal moves. Lisa Turpin hopped around the classroom 3 times, while keeping her hands on top of her head, pretending to be rabbit ears, and Slytherin Zabini, under the influence of the spell, jumped onto the table, then bent down, patted his chest with both hands, and howled like a chimpanzee a few times. For most of the students, they had no resistance to this spell and only returned to normal after Moody lifted the curse. Professor Moody seemed a little disappointed. After all, everyone was a 4th-year student, and it was a bit disappointing that they had almost zero resistance when facing the Imperious Curse. Mr. Granger, now it's your turn, Moody said in a booming voice. Come, let me see. As a recipient of the Order of Merlin, First Class, don't disappoint everyone. Hugo immediately stood up from his seat and walked to the center of the classroom, and everyone's attention was focused on him. Professor Moody raised his wand, pointed it at Hugo, and shouted, Imperio, what should we do now? Moody said, looking at Hugo, who was standing blankly in the center of the classroom. How about you go to the wall and do a handstand against the wall? Just as Moody cast the spell, Hugo felt an unprecedented sense of wonder. He felt light all over, and the thoughts and worries in his mind were swept away, leaving only a hazy, invisible, and intangible joy. Then, he heard Mad Eye Moody's command, as if echoing from some distant corner, go to the wall and stand upside down. This command was completely ineffective on Hugo. After multiple enhancements, Hugo's soul was already strong enough to resist such magic. He just wanted to experience what the Imperious Curse felt like. In fact, after the first ship girl was summoned, he became completely immune to this type of manipulative magic, because the Admiral network connected everyone's souls together, forming an indestructible soul defense line. Because he had a strong soul as a backing, Hugo easily resisted Moody's command and woke up from the previous state. To outsiders, it seemed that he only took a dozen seconds to get rid of the influence of the Imperious Curse. To get rid of the Imperious Curse, the most important thing is to have a strong soul and willpower is the most important point. Fortunately, Hugo had experienced a lot of actual combat, so getting rid of this type of magic was not difficult. Very good, that's it. Seeing Hugo successfully resist this spell, Moody's face showed a satisfied smile. Look, everyone. Granger resisted. He not only resisted, but also defeated this spell. Let's try again, Granger. Everyone else watch carefully, look into his eyes, that's the key. Soon, Moody cast the Imperious Curse on Hugo again, but with a previous experience, he almost instantly woke up from the control of the Imperious Curse this time. Mr. Granger, very good. They can't easily control you. Moody nodded in satisfaction. It seems that the Ministry of Magic is not all useless. At least the Order of Merlin you received is definitely genuine. After class, the news that Hugo resisted the Imperious Curse in the first round spread throughout the school, and many people came to ask him how he did it. Obviously, Hugo also knew that his experiences were impossible to replicate, so he could only give everyone chicken soup. We shouldn't be afraid of any difficulties we encounter. Face them with a smile. The best way to overcome fear is to face fear. Come on, Ali Jebin. Although this was an extremely correct and somewhat convoluted nonsense, it became valuable under the contrast of Hugo's successful example, especially after a series of explanations by Ravenclaw students. Many students understood this to mean that if they wanted to improve their will and resist the Imperious Curse, the core was to face what they feared and overcome their inner fears. This directly caused two major consequences. One of them was that Hagrid found that the blast-ended scroots he raised seemed to be more popular. Some students who previously couldn't wait to avoid them were now willing to take the initiative to approach the blast-ended scroots. The other point was that Professor Snape found that his deterrent power seemed to have declined. Many students now dared to look him in the eye soon. The time came to late October. This day, just as Hugo and the others finished class and went to the Great Hall for dinner, they found a notice posted on the bulletin board downstairs: the Triwizard Tournament. The representatives of Boxburtons and Durmstrang will arrive at 6 o'clock on Friday evening, October 30th. Afternoon classes will end half an hour early. At that time, students are requested to return their bags and textbooks to the dormitory and gather in front of the castle to welcome our guests, and then attend the welcome banquet. Just like throwing a stone into Calm Lake, the news that the Triwizard Tournament was about to begin spread throughout Hogwarts in an instant. In the following week, no matter where Hugo went, he seemed to only hear various topics related to the Triwizard Tournament. Rumors spread quickly among the students, like highly contagious bacteria, who will be Hogwarts champion, what projects will the tournament have, and how are Boxburtons and Durmstrang students different from them. After all, in the wizarding world, the density of various international collaborations is significantly lower than in the ordinary human world. Even many pure-blood wizards are not very clear about what the wizards outside their own country are like. Therefore, when this kind of international event is held, everyone is naturally very excited. Because for many wizards, this may be one of the few opportunities in their lives to have close contact with foreign wizards. The Weasley family was even more excited than others, because their cousin in Boxburtons wrote to them that she had passed the internal competition in Boxburtons and had obtained the qualification to go to Hogwarts to participate in the Triwizard Tournament. For the Weasley family, they value family very much. After learning that their niece was coming, Mrs. Weasley specifically wrote to several children to ask them to treat their cousin well as hosts. Especially the twins also received a special letter from Mrs. Weasley, asking them to do what a host should do and not do anything that would shame the Weasley name. Chapter 321 Prepare. The impending arrival of the Boxburtons and Durmstrang teams had a direct impact on Hogwarts, most notably in the increased cleanliness of the entire school. It wasn't that Hogwarts was unclean before, but the previous cleanliness was merely a matter of tidiness, whereas now it was a thorough renovation from the inside out. For example, the patina on several old portraits had been scrubbed away, causing the figures in the paintings to wince in pain whenever they touched their newly exposed pink skin. At the same time, the suits of armor placed throughout the school had been refurbished, their surfaces polished to shine, and the joints repaired to eliminate any squeaking during movement. Even the school's ghosts held a meeting, where the Bloody Baron volunteered to keep Peeves under control when the guests arrived, preventing Hogwarts from embarrassing itself in front of the other two schools. Argus Filch, the caretaker, also became somewhat neurotic, erupting in fury at any students who forgot to clean their shoes, frightening two first-year girls into hysterics. The other professors also displayed nervousness. Aside from Snape, whose disposition was perpetually sour, even the usually amiable Professor Flitwick unprecedentedly reprimanded several students for making basic errors in class. In contrast to the professor's anxiety, the students became more lively, viewing it as a prime opportunity to meet foreign friends. Consequently, during this period, students of all years, both boys and girls, paid more attention to their appearance, as if the upcoming Triwizard Tournament were a grand social ball. On the morning of October 30th, the Great Hall, designated as the reception area, had been completely transformed overnight. Giant silk banners hung on the walls, the flags of the four houses fluttering high above, and magical enhancements were evident everywhere. In the morning, as Hugo, his sister, and Veneto arrived at the table for breakfast, they noticed the Weasley twins conferring in the distance, then beckoning Hugo over with a secretive gesture. "We've made a decision to partner with the Golden Hogsmeade Emporium," Fred said quietly, glancing around after Hugo approached them in the corner of the hall. because we wrote to several friends, older students, and relatives, and they all expressed a positive opinion of the shop," George continued. "So now it's just a matter of contacting them. That's easy, just write to Aunt Nanny," Hugo said with a shrug. They're not averse to investing in promising ventures. After discussing the investment, Hugo inquired about the twins' plans to circumvent Dumbledore's age limit. "We've decided to use aging potions," Fred said, raising his eyebrows. "Since we're only a few months short, a well-made potion should be undetectable." "I'm not so sure about that," Hugo replied, shaking his head. "Aging potions are common in the wizarding world, and they'll definitely be watching for that in an international competition like this. But the problem is, we don't have access to anything else right now," George said, grimacing. "So we can only hope for good luck." Throughout the day, the air was filled with an expectant excitement. In class, no one paid attention, everyone anticipating the arrival of the Booksburtons and Durmstrang students. That evening the last Ravenclaw class was Charms. Professor Flitwick condensed the lesson, covering the day's material in half the time. Then spent the remaining minutes sharing details about the Triwizard Tournament. Therefore, while this competition can bring honor to the participants, it also carries significant risks. I urge you to consider this carefully before entering, to ensure it's truly what you desire. As the bell rang, Professor Flitwick delivered his final words, then waved, signaling everyone to return to their dormitories, tidy themselves, and come down for the welcoming ceremony. When Hugo and his companions arrived at the entrance hall, many people were already there. The heads of the various houses, aided by the prefects, were directing the students into lines. "Weasley, straighten your hat. Miss Pettigrew, remove that ridiculous thing from your hair." Hugo heard Professor McGonagall's stern voice as he joined the ranks once the lines were mostly arranged. Professor McGonagall, as deputy headmistress, instructed everyone to form up and follow her onto the lawn in front of the castle. It was late October, and as evening approached, the weather turned cold, with occasional gusts of wind. Several young wizards, prioritizing style over warmth, shivered. Nevertheless, the crowd remained enthusiastic, looking around and whispering amongst themselves, despite the prefect's repeated attempts to quiet them. "They're here," Veneto suddenly whispered as Hugo glanced at his watch, noticing it was a little past 6 o'clock, while pointing to a distant spot. After several minutes of gazing in the direction she indicated, others finally spotted a few dark shapes appearing in the night sky, growing closer. Just then, Dumbledore, standing with the other teachers in the back row, called out, "Ah! If I'm not mistaken, the Booksburtons delegation has arrived." Upon hearing Headmaster Dumbledore's voice, nearly all the students looked up and saw the black dot growing larger. Soon, everyone clearly saw Behemoth emerge from the clouds, soaring over the Forbidden Forest and descending towards them. "A flying house, no, a flying carriage," a sixth-year Hufflepuff girl exclaimed. As everyone watched, the massive object flew overhead as the dark behemoth swept over the treetops of the Forbidden Forest. Illuminated by the lights from the castle windows, they saw a giant, powder blue carriage flying towards them. It was the size of a house, drawn by 12 winged horses, all silver manes, each about the size of an elephant. The carriage flew lower, descending rapidly. The students in the first 3 rows quickly retreated. Then, with a deafening crash, the silver manes landed one after another close to the crowd. In an instant, the carriage landed, shuddering on its massive wheels, while the golden horses shook their enormous heads, their fiery red eyes darting about. Then, the door, emblazoned with a coat of arms depicting 2 crossed golden wands, opened, and a boy in a pale blue uniform jumped down. He fumbled at the bottom of the carriage, unlocking a golden spiral staircase, and a high-ranking witch with ornate makeup stepped out. Upon seeing her, the students present couldn't help but gasp, even Hugo, who knew beforehand that the Booksburtons' headmistress was a half-giant. Although he had even encountered the rarest and most human-like of giants, the impact of seeing such a large figure standing among a crowd of people was still profound. Soon, Dumbledore began to applaud, and the students followed suit, many standing on tiptoe, trying to get a better look at the woman. As the 2 headmasters greeted each other. Chapter 322 Welcome Banquet. Just as Madame Maxime and Headmaster Dumbledore were exchanging greetings, more than a dozen students stepped down from the huge carriage behind them. These students appeared to be around 17 or 18 years old, with girls seemingly making up the majority, each possessing graceful figures and wearing gorgeous silk robes. Hugo curiously stared at the girls, hoping to find Miss Fleur, who was to be the representative. Unfortunately, due to the weather, almost all the girls had scarves wrapped around their heads, obscuring their faces. After Madame Maxime conversed with Dumbledore for a while, she left the carriage and led the Booksburton students to rest inside the castle. Meanwhile, the Hogwarts students continued to wait on the lawn for the arrival of the Durmstrang delegation. The sky had completely darkened, and the wind by the lake became increasingly biting. Just as the sounds of sneezing and sniffing grew louder, everyone finally heard a strange noise carried on the wind accompanied by a suppressed sucking sound. The black lake stirred, and huge splashes erupted on the surface, waves crashing against a damp shore. Then, right in the center of the lake, a large whirlpool appeared, as if a giant plug had suddenly been pulled from the bottom of the lake. Next, a mast slowly rose from the center of the whirlpool, followed by towering sails, and finally, a huge sailboat directly burst out of the water, sending water splashing everywhere, creating a mist. Wow, 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 it's a ghost ship, Hugo suddenly recalled Victory's voice. But I can guarantee you 100% that this ship is definitely not as beautiful as me. Of course, it's not as beautiful as you. Hearing Victory say this, Hugo also said seriously. Because the ship in front of them looked really old, it felt like a shipwreck that had just been salvaged. The ship sailed along, and in a few minutes, the large ship slowly stopped at the lakeside. With a muffled thud, a sturdy wooden plank extended from the ship and rested on the shore. Then, a group of people wearing fur cloaks, looking furry all over like upright bears, walked off the ship in single file, only lowering the hoods of their cloaks after disembarking. Leading the group was an old wizard wearing a white cloak. He was tall and thin, with a goatee that curled at the ends on his gaunt chin, and his eyes were cold and sharp, making him look like an unscrupulous person. However, a smile quickly appeared on his face, and he extended his hand towards Headmaster Dumbledore, greeting him in a rounded and sweet voice. Dumbledore. My dear old friend, how are you? Very well, thank you, Professor Karkaroff. Dumbledore wore a polite smile and shook hands with Karkaroff, who had stepped forward. Hogwarts, it's truly a pleasure to be here. Karkaroff's face showed a smile, but his eyes remained as cold and sharp as ice. It is indeed a great honor to be here. Victor, come over here and warm up. You don't mind, do you, Dumbledore? Victor has a bit of a cold. Following Karkaroff's call, a boy who should have been 17 or 18 years old, but looked like he was 25 or 26, walked out from the crowd and stood opposite Dumbledore. At this moment, a murmur arose among the Hogwarts students, as everyone recognized this famous young Quidditch star. Since everyone had arrived, the Hogwarts students also followed behind the Durmstrang delegation, lining up to ascend the stone steps. As everyone walked towards the castle, the murmuring voices converged, as if everyone was discussing Victor Krum. Although Krum's loss this year was clearly more embarrassing than in the original story, not only did his team lose, but he also failed to catch the golden snitch. His popularity among young people rose instead of falling. This was mainly because the Comet 3 broom had a clear advantage over the Firebolt in such a top-level competition, so most people believe that Bulgaria's defeat this year was entirely due to circumstances beyond their control. As a result, Krum was naturally regarded as a tragic hero. According to rumors, after he returned to his country, the condolence letters written by fans alone totaled 500 or 600. Soon, Hugo and the others sat down at the Ravenclaw table. At this time, the Booksburton students had already taken their seats in the latter half of the Ravenclaw table. The Durmstrang students stood at the entrance of the hall, looking inside for more than 10 seconds, then went straight to the Slytherin table and sat down. Obviously, the reason they made this choice was likely related to the fact that there were fewer people at the Slytherin table, and it was also possible that they knew that the pure-blood Slytherin house had the atmosphere that best matched them. After all the students entered the hall and took their seats at their respective house tables, the faculty members entered, walking in single file to the head table and sitting down. Walking at the end of the line were the 3 headmasters, and when the Booksburton students saw their headmistress enter, they all stood up until Madame Maxime sat down before they sat down again. It seems that Booksburton's must be very strict in its management. Hermione leaned close to Hugo and said softly, as far as I know, only some aristocratic schools and military academies in the Muggle world are like this. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, ghosts, and, especially, guests. Headmaster Dumbledore, who had been standing by the podium since he came in, said, while smiling at the foreign students, "It is with great joy that I welcome you to Hogwarts. I hope and believe that you will feel comfortable and happy here." For some reason, a Booksburton's girl let out a sneer at this moment, which drew angry stares from many Hogwarts students. However, the old headmaster, who had lived for more than 100 years, had seen all kinds of storms, so he naturally wouldn't argue with this teenage girl. So he just pretended not to hear it and continued his speech. The Triwizard Tournament will officially begin at the end of the feast. Dumbledore said. "I now invite everyone to eat and drink to your heart's content, just like you are at home." In an instant, the plates in front of everyone were filled with food as usual. However, the difference was that many of the foods today came from France and Northern Europe, presumably specially prepared for the guests. French fish stew, it's quite authentic. Hermione scooped some soup from a large pot in front of her into her small bowl and tasted it, saying, "The craftsmanship is about the same as Richelieu's sisters before." During the summer vacation, because of the subdimension left by Nicholas Flamel, it was obviously much easier for the shipgirls to visit each other than before, so Hugo and Hermione, the siblings, also tasted all kinds of delicacies cooked by most of the shipgirls. It has to be said that Hogwarts house elves are indeed amazing. Even if they have never cooked foreign dishes before, they can still guarantee deliciousness under the comfort of delicious food and a warm environment. The Durmstrang students took off their fur cloaks, revealing the blood-red robes they wore inside, and the Buxbaton students also took off their scarves. Chapter 323 Goblet of Fire. The moment the Buxbaton students removed their scarves, a small commotion arose among the Hogwarts students, because one of the girls seemed to possess an extraordinary allure. This girl had long, waterfall-like silver hair that cascaded down to her waist, along with a pair of large, azure blue eyes and a set of pearly white, even teeth. Fleur Delacour, Hugo immediately recognized the specific identity of the girl who had just given a cold snort during the headmaster's speech. In terms of appearance alone, Fleur's looks were already quite stunning, but only on par with a normal state ship girl. What truly attracted people was her special aura, like a magnet that made it impossible to look away. Is that girl really human? As soon as Fleur revealed her appearance, Hermione suddenly said to Hugo through the Admiral network. "When she showed her face, I felt a mental shock. This is completely beyond what a human can do." "Your feeling is correct, my dear sister," Hugo said, looking at Fleur sitting not far away. "If you feel carefully, you will find that this mental shock is similar to what we encountered during the summer vacation." "Vila, no, that's not right. Non-human creatures are not allowed to use wands." Hermione reacted at once, before Hugo could finish speaking. "She must be a witch with Velar blood. I think that's most likely the case, and I think she's very likely to become Buxbaton's champion this year," Hugo reminded his sister. "Compared to ordinary wizards, these wizards with non-human blood often have special advantages in certain aspects. For example, our head of house, Professor Flitwick, has a much stronger spellcasting ability than ordinary wizards." Just as the two were quickly exchanging information, the doors of the Great Hall opened, and Ludo Bagman and Barty Crouch walked in and sat down on the two empty seats on the head table. Obviously, as the organizer of the event, the Ministry of Magic would definitely send someone to participate in the opening ceremony, so it sent Ministry of Magic officials related to foreign exchange to show their presence. As long as everything goes normally, tomorrow's Daily Prophet will feature a front-page article similar to "Under the wise leadership of the Ministry of Magic, the Triwizard Tournament successfully opened at Hogwarts." And so on. When the last dessert was also eaten, the golden plates were wiped clean again. At this time, Professor Dumbledore stood up and walked to the side of the podium. Without him speaking, the entire hall quieted down once more. An emotion of excitement and tension seemed to permeate the entire hall, because everyone knew that the headmaster would next announce the method for selecting the Triwizard champions. Regarding how the Triwizard Tournament participants should be selected, the Gryffindor and Hufflepuff students listed many guesses, ranging from dueling selection to school-wide voting. However, for the Ravenclaw and Slytherin students, they had already learned from their elders at home or from books that this competition was traditionally selected by a magical artifact called the Goblet of Fire, similar to the Sorting Hat. The moment has finally arrived. Dumbledore did not beat around the bush. The Triwizard Tournament is about to begin. I would like to explain a few words before bringing in the box. First, let me introduce our guests, Mr. Bagman and Mr. Crouch from the Ministry of Magic, who have been making various preparations for the Triwizard Tournament for the past few months. When the headmaster finished speaking, everyone applauded. Mr. Bagman smiled and waved to everyone after hearing the applause, while Crouch still sat there with a serious face. In the next period of time, they, along with myself, Professor Karkaroff, and Madame Maxime, will form a judging panel to evaluate the efforts of the champions. Dumbledore continued after the applause stopped. As soon as they heard the word champions, all the students perked up. Dumbledore seemed to notice their sudden silence, and he smiled slightly and said, "Mr. Filch, please bring up the box." No one noticed that Filch had been lurking in a corner of the hall just now. At this moment, he walked towards Dumbledore, holding a large wooden box inlaid with jewels in his hand. The box looked very old. There was even a layer of obvious patina on it. The specific events of this year's Champions competition have been carefully reviewed by Mr. Crouch and Mr. Bagman, Dumbledore said. At this time, Filch carefully placed a box on the table in front of him. They have also made many necessary arrangements for each event. There are 3 events in total, which will be held at different times throughout the school year, and they will test the champions in many different aspects, test their magical talent, their courage and their reasoning ability, and, of course, their ability to overcome danger. Hearing the last sentence, the hall became silent, and everyone seemed to stop breathing. As you already know, there will be 3 champions participating in the competition, Dumbledore continued calmly, each representing a participating school. We will score them based on the quality of their completion of each competition event. After the 3 events are over, the champion with the highest score will win the Triwizard Cup. The one responsible for selecting the champions is a fair selector, and that is the Goblet of Fire. Speaking of this, Headmaster Dumbledore pulled out his wand and tapped the box 3 times. The lid slowly creaked open. He reached in and took out a roughly carved wooden goblet. The cup itself did not look eye-catching, but inside, there were blue and white flames dancing. At the same time, Hugo could feel that there was a soul hidden in this flame that was similar to the core of the Sorting Hat. This is actually a relatively advanced application of ancient alchemy, and as part of the research results in the research direction of artificial intelligent life. It's just that, apart from Hugo and the ship girls, the other students on the scene can't see the mystery in the Goblet of Fire at all, so naturally, they feel that it is unremarkable. Every student who wants to compete for the champion must write his name and school name on a piece of parchment and throw it into this goblet, Dumbledore said, closing the box and placing the cup on the lid so that everyone in the hall could see the cup clearly. Anyone who aspires to be a champion can register within 24 hours. Tomorrow night, that is, on Halloween night, the goblet will select the names of the 3 students it deems most capable of representing the 3 schools. Tonight, the goblet will be placed in the entrance hall, and all students who wish to participate in the competition can come into contact with it. In order to prevent underage students from being tempted, after the goblet is placed in the entrance hall, I will draw an age line around it. Anyone under the age of 17 will not be able to cross this line. In addition, each of the 3 schools will send personnel to guard the only entrance and exit of the hall tonight to ensure the safety of the Goblet of Fire. Where did these guards come from? After hearing Dumbledore say this, Hugo felt a little surprised, because he remembered that this matter did not exist in the original text at all. Chapter 324 Place Name. The matter of the guards was my suggestion. Just as Hugo was curious about where this guard came from, Enterprise's voice rang in his mind. Although we can't even be sure if Voldemort and his Death Eaters will enter Hogwarts this year, for safety reasons, I plan to stand guard here tonight and see what happens. Because of a series of changes before, Hugo and the others have now lost many advantages of foresight. Therefore, the shipgirls plan to take the initiative to lock onto the enemies that may be hiding in the darkness. That's a great idea, but your safety comes first. So, just confirm the other party's identity, and remember to discuss the follow-up matters with everyone, Hugo immediately instructed. After hearing what Enterprise said after Hugo finished his instructions, the headmaster began to give everyone final reminders. Finally, I want to remind every student who wants to participate in the election to note that this Triwizard tournament is not a game, and you must not participate rashly. Once a champion is selected by the Goblet of Fire, he must persevere in the competition to the end. Whoever throws their name into the goblet is actually forming a magical contract that must be obeyed. Once you become a champion, you are not allowed to change your mind. Therefore, please think twice and make sure that you really want to participate in the competition before throwing your name into the goblet. Okay, I think everyone should go to sleep. Good night, everyone. As everyone left the Great Hall, almost everyone was discussing the Goblet of Fire and the age line. Compared to the unease of the Hogwarts students, the students of the other 2 schools were full of confidence. According to what Hugo heard, both the Booksbritons and Durmstrang students believe that Hogwarts, which changed its defense against the dark arts teacher every year, had a huge disadvantage in this practical competition. These guys are obviously overconfident, Veneto whispered to Hugo. If I participated in the competition, all these guys tied together wouldn't be my match. Soon, the Hogwarts students returned to their respective common rooms, while the students from the other 2 schools returned to their carriages and sailing ship. Obviously, both the sailing ship and the carriage were similar to the tents used by the Wizards at the Quidditch World Cup, and they both used space extension charms, so they could live comfortably inside. I think Veneto should be able to break through that age limit and become a Hogwarts champion, Hermione said softly on the way back to the common room. I just don't know who the champions from the other schools will be. I think that if there are no accidents, the Durmstrang representative should be that Krum, because compared to others, Krum is obviously much stronger. As for Boxplittons, I guess that Villa Hybrid will most likely stand out. Compared to ordinary human wizards, she does have a great advantage. After returning to the common room, Hugo found several people selling potions similar to aging potions. Obviously, many people felt that they could break through the headmaster's age line through similar methods. Hey, Hugo, Michael Corner raised a small bottle and asked after seeing Hugo and the others come in. Do you want some of these aging potions? Not for now, because I have other ways, Hugo said with a smile. If you're willing, you can write your name on a piece of paper and give it to me, so if we succeed, we can help you submit it. Really? Wait for me. After hearing what Hugo said, Corner's eyes lit up, and then more than a dozen people who were familiar with Hugo, Hermione, or Veneto wrote notes and gave them to them one after another. The next day was a Saturday. Generally speaking, students would go to breakfast very late. However, on this day, because of the selection of champions, many people got up early and came to the Great Hall, eating breakfast while staring at the Goblet of Fire. The goblet was placed in the center of the entrance hall, on the stool where the sorting hat was usually placed. A thin golden line was drawn on the floor, 10 feet long on each side, surrounding the goblet. 10 feet is equivalent to 3 meters. Hugo felt that this distance should be easy for normal people to throw a paper ball into the goblet. But strangely, although a circle of people around were eager to try, no one did so. Ryan curiously asked the onlookers next to him about this question. Hannah Abbott said with a smile, Justin just tried it, and then his paper ball bounced back onto his head and turned his hair pink. Lisa Turpin from your house wanted to use a stick to clip the paper ball and throw it into the Goblet of Fire, but the stick and her entire arm turned green. The worst was a Slytherin. He wanted a senior to help him bring it over. As a result, his paper ball burned to ashes as soon as it crossed the age line, and it also burned a big hole in the senior's pocket. It seems that some things really need to be carefully planned in advance. After listening to the previous series of Pioneer's failures, Hugo fell into deep thought. He could now confirm that some fanfics in his previous life were deceiving people as the greatest white wizard in Europe and a well-experienced centenarian. It would be an underestimation of Dumbledore if the age circle he drew could be broken by simple muggle tricks. Don't worry, this is just a simple magic confrontation, Veneto whispered. At least I can use magic to protect the paper I carry from being burned, because the words Hugo said in the Ravenclaw common room yesterday also spread on a small scale in the outer courtyard. Several Hufflepuff and Gryffindor students also tried to give them a copy of their paper. Are you sure you can really throw the paper in? Ron asked curiously after watching Hugo hand his and Harry's paper to Veneto. It's hard to say, no one can be sure of this until they try, Hugo shrugged at Ron. But even if it doesn't succeed, you'll only waste a little ink and a small piece of parchment. At this moment, the Weasley twins also walked over, then drank the aging potion and jumped into the age circle, only to be bounced out and grow long white beards. Hi, I told you long ago that aging potions don't work, Ryan happily shouted to the twins after seeing this famous scene. The twins immediately walked towards Hugo after hearing this. I seem to have heard that Miss Veneto seems to have a way to break through the age circle set by the headmaster. Fred raised his voice a little at this time. Dumbledore had just finished breakfast at this time and was preparing to leave the Great Hall. After hearing about Hugo's plan, not only did he not stop it, but he also stroked his beard with interest and watched at the same time. The students and teachers from the other two schools who had finished submitting their papers were also attracted by Fred's words. Because just now several people had boasted and were bounced out by the age circle, so they also wanted to see how the next unlucky person would be unlucky. Then you can watch carefully, Veneto said at this time, finishing the last bit of milk in his bowl, then stood up in the eyes of everyone and walked to the age line. Chapter 325 Put in the name. Just as Veneto was approaching the age limit, many onlookers gathered, including Durmstrang students who had just submitted their names. After all, Veneto had killed a giant troll through hand-to-hand combat in her first year, making her a celebrity at the school. Therefore, many people were curious to see how she would break through the age limit. Veneto, in front of everyone, took out her wand, grabbed her left hand, and cast several layers of iron skin charms on her right hand. Then, she took a goblet from the nearby table and transformed it into an ancient-style armored gauntlet, which she put on her right hand. Do you want to break Headmaster Dumbledore's magic circle? Laughter and exclamations came from the crowd. In their opinion, the headmaster's magic shouldn't be breakable by physical means. Of course not, but I don't need to directly confront headmaster's age circle. Veneto gently shook her head. Don't forget, this magic is cast on the ground. Unlike the floating circle of mist in the movies, the current situation was closer to the description in the novels, where the age circle was a golden square drawn on the ground around the goblet of fire. As Veneto spoke, she knelt on one knee at the edge of the age circle, then raised her right hand, wearing the armored gauntlet, and slammed it down heavily. Whoa, boom, with a sharp whistling sound, the punch landed heavily on the ground. A cloud of dust rose sharply from below, obscuring her figure amidst the loud collision. No, this is impossible. As the dust cleared a little, Marietta, who had been craning her neck to watch the excitement, was the first to exclaim at this moment. Veneto's fist had dented the ground, and a large number of cracks appeared around the point of impact. The stone bricks of the floor also showed large areas of cracking, and falling off the age circle set by Professor Dumbledore began to flicker due to the destruction of its carrier, revealing many gaps. While the dust hadn't yet settled, Veneto, certain of the effect of her strike, suddenly pushed her leg back and jumped up, rushing to the goblet of fire and stuffing all the slips of paper in her hand into it. Throughout the entire process, Headmaster Dumbledore's age limit had no effect whatsoever. When Veneto finally emerged from the completely dim age circle, she had neither white hair nor a white beard. Boom! A commotion erupted around them, mixed with applause and whistles. The clearest of all was the Weasley twins' cheers. She did it, heavens! Veneto put her name in the goblet of fire. Thank you everyone. Veneto waved to those cheering for her, but at this moment, a low and smiling voice came from beside her. Miss Veneto, I certainly didn't consider things thoroughly enough when I was making the decision. At this moment, Dumbledore walked in from the crowd, then looked at the mess on the ground and said, frankly, I never imagined that a wizard's strength could reach this level. And I also didn't expect that you would be able to observe the flaws in the age circle I drew. Thank you for your praise, Professor. Veneto smiled and bowed slightly to Dumbledore. However, what you did was still a bit reckless, especially putting so many students' votes in at once. Don't forget, the Triwizard Tournament is a very dangerous competition, and you've essentially put everyone in danger. Headmaster Dumbledore suddenly sternly said, I don't think so. I previously checked all the information about the Triwizard Tournament, and it said that the Goblet of Fire always chooses the most powerful student in the school to participate in the competition. Veneto defended herself, so I dare say that if everything is normal, students who haven't reached the age won't be selected by the Goblet of Fire, so everyone is just wasting a little parchment and ink to experience it. Your analysis is indeed very reasonable. After being told this by Veneto, the headmaster shook his head. But you still violated the school rules, so you will need to serve detention for the next month. Of course, you're not the only one serving detention. Professor Dumbledore raised his head at this time and looked around. The students who asked Miss Veneto to help them vote will each receive 10 days of detention from their head of house. After saying these things, Headmaster Dumbledore redrew a circle floating in the air like in the movies, and then left the Great Hall under the students' gazes. After the headmaster left, the students who had been around Veneto immediately surrounded her and began asking questions about everything she had just done. Soon, the news of Veneto putting her name in the Goblet of Fire swept through Hogwarts, and even spread to other schools. But unexpectedly, there weren't many protests about this matter. Hugo thought about it and felt that this was also quite reasonable. Leaving aside the fact that Hogwarts champion hadn't been selected yet, even if a fourth-year student like Veneto was really selected, it should be good news for them in order to avoid those curious gazes. Veneto came out of the crowd surrounding her and went with Hugo and his sister to Hagrid's, preparing to avoid the noisy crowd. I didn't expect you to be so strong. After arriving at Hagrid's, Hagrid said to Veneto while ironing textiles, but you're too young. The chance of actually being selected isn't very big. Some things, you always have to try to do while you're young, otherwise you'll definitely regret it when you get older. Veneto took a sip of tea and looked up at Hagrid. By the way, what are you doing now? Hagrid was currently ironing a large, dark blue textile on the ironing board. This textile was very large, and in Hugo's eyes, it looked like a tent. Oh, this is my new suit. I plan to wear it to tonight's Halloween feast, so it looks a little more formal, Hagrid said with a smile, and thanks to your previous help in publishing that book and helping me contact Miss Unyielding for cooperation, I have enough money to customize such a suit. Actually, we didn't do much, it's just that you didn't discover your own special talents before. Hugo smiled and shook his head. It must be said that Hagrid's current outfit looks much better than in the novels. In the following time, everyone gathered together to discuss various knowledge about magical creatures. Some of this knowledge could help Unyielding and the others. At noon, Veneto borrowed the raw materials and cooking utensils from Hagrid's place and made a lunch mainly consisting of Italian noodles and stew. To be honest, Hagrid's cooking utensils were both large and heavy, and if the ship girls didn't have extraordinary physical strength, they wouldn't be able to use them at all. At 3 p.m., Hagrid began to dress himself up. With Veneto's intervention, Hagrid's look has obviously improved more than one level. This is standard Milan fashion. After giving Hagrid a haircut and trimming his beard, Veneto said to Hagrid, who was holding up a mirror and looking at himself, "It's obviously more suitable for a banquet than your previous image." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.